First hearing of the year, we're just getting some of the technical stuff together, but we'll be starting in just a minute. All right, welcome everyone. Appreciate everyone being here today. We put this together because we thought it would be helpful to hear from our local jurisdictions about the impact of some of these transportation cuts that I've referred to in the past as harsh, especially in light of the fact that there was no roadshow on these cuts this year, and that MDOT has told us that these reductions to these programs remain in the CTP in fiscal 25 and beyond. I think somewhat coincidentally, the governor did announce restorations to some of these cuts just this morning. I think it's good timing, and I think it means the administration is listening. So I want to thank members here, community leaders, advocacy groups, everyone who advocated for restoration. But we should be clear that these restorations are not a long-term fix. I think they're Band-Aids, not bridges. They do not resolve our long-term problems of the solvency of the Transportation Trust Fund. And without solutions, we're just going to be back here next year, right? Facing cuts to lots, MTA, HUR, WMATA, critical construction projects. Even the restorations that were made do not restore many of the projects that remain cut across the state, really that affect every corner of the state. And so it's important for us to hear from the localities as to how these cuts really will affect them, whether it be this year or in the long term. So we welcome all of you. I think illustrating the importance of transportation in this state and these cuts in the long-term picture is the fact that we are joined today by our Speaker of the House, Adrian Jones. Madam Speaker, thank you so much. I'll yield to you for any opening comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair Barnes and Vice Chair Chang, for holding this important briefing today. Today's discussion is very important to me, to every member of the House of Delegates, and to every Marylander. If not, it should be. I look forward to hearing about how the updated consolidated transportation program will impact our local jurisdictions as we work to keep Maryland moving. With that, turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks again, Madam Speaker, for being here. Without further ado, we're joined by Steve McCulloch, Transportation Specialist at DLS, as well as Ryan Bishop, our Director of Office of Policy Analysis. Thank you both for being here. Mr. McCulloch, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Madam Speaker. Steve McCulloch is with the Department of Legislative Services. I'm here today to just kind of bring you up to date on what that shortfall that was announced with the release of the 2024 draft CTP in September, the December update that modified that description. So just getting off to the start. Let me go this way. So the September draft that was released had a shortfall of $2.1 billion. The shortfall was unusual in that in prior years, whenever there was a decrease in available revenues for the capital project program, the administration would reduce the projects, defer them, push them out in order to align capital spending in the CTP by year with the expected available revenues. In the September draft, they deviated from that process and showed basically an relatively unchanged CTP from last January. However, in the meantime, operating spending impacts and revenue changes led to that $2.1 billion less over the 6-year program than would support the capital program. In December, after hearing from many people, including this committee, in terms of the need for more explanation of what those reductions and changes would be in order to balance the CTP for the final that is supposed to be released tomorrow. The department released a December update that both showed an increase in the shortfall to $3.3 billion and then solved it with a number of actions. So the major drivers of the increase between the $2.1 billion and the 3.3 were additional operating spending. A large part of that over the 6 years was increased funding for the WMATA, Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority operating budget to help address their fiscal cliff. But there was also additional capital spending that was added in this point of time. And that's important to note that the December update was a point in time similar to the way September was a point in time. A lot of decisions were made, and we'll find out tomorrow if there's anything that's been changed since the December point in time. And then there were also the recognized need that with a lot of federal discretionary grants on the horizon, that the department would need to have funds available to match those, since we don't want to turn around away federal funds. Now, the shortfall overall was due to a number of factors. One was the federal COVID funding that came in to help Maryland and other transit systems across the United States deal with plummeting really ridership and increased costs at the same time. So for Maryland, the MTA got about $1.6 billion, $1.8 billion in funding over 4 years, and the WMATA piece, which helped maintain the Maryland rate for its operating grant. WMATA received $2.8 billion over that time. So 2024, the current year, is the last year that those funds are available. They are disappearing. So those need to be kind of backfilled, if you will. At the same time, we've kind of been on a path to, if not outright declines in the motor fuel tax due to increased efficiency of vehicles and the increased adoption of electric vehicles. We've certainly been on slower growth, and now it's looking like in this current projection that we are actually maybe peaking and seeing declining in that revenue source, which has been the largest revenue source for the state source for the Maryland Transportation Trust Fund for many years. Also leading to this shortfall was the fact that the transit ridership, which dropped during the pandemic, has not rebounded, which means fare revenue is not coming in at the same levels. And then finally, there were operating cost pressures that you all addressed and have seen across state government. In order to attract and retain employees, there have been some fairly robust increases in the last couple of years in salaries and benefits. That increases pressure for MDOT, as it does for all agencies, in terms of increasing their operating costs. For the Department of Transportation, increased operating kind of is a direct decrease to the capital availability, because capital funding is the final call on the trust fund dollars. The department has to pay debt service first, then operating. Whatever's left goes to the capital program. So increased operating, decreased capital. So the December update the department posted had kind of 3 pillars that it used to solve this shortfall. Some increased revenues, decreased operating spending, and deferring or eliminating capital projects to align the program with available funds. In terms of increased revenues, the department has some ability on its own to raise some revenues, things like the parking at BWI Airport, parking fees, Maryland Port Administration fees, and some MVA fees, excluding registration fees, which do require legislation. So of that, they estimated that about $80 million of their own, actions could raise revenues by $80 million per year. On the operating reductions, they targeted $184 million in fiscal 2025, with about $170 million of that was intended to continue into the out years as ongoing savings. And that is it's that this piece primarily that the announcement that the chairman referenced that came out this morning addresses those operating cuts for the most part. And then there were capital budget reductions, deferring or eliminating projects. This includes, removing expansion projects for state highway administration for anything that hadn't been advertised. That equaled $438 million. That was part of a $1.2 billion over the 6 years that the department was eliminating for state highways. There was also a proposal by the administration in December to freeze the level of highway user revenues going to locals. So a couple of years ago, you all passed legislation which increased the share temporarily for the locals. It was due to go up in 2025, and in December, the administration said, let's not do that next increase, just keep it level with the current level. And then also they had some other reductions in capital projects for port administration and the other modal administrations, though at much smaller levels. And then my final graphic here basically shows the steps in this. So the first bar represents the $2.1 billion reduction. The second bar shows the increased operating spending that was added since the January or September CTB came out. So one of the biggest items there was the administration added 108 positions to improve MTA service in the Baltimore region. And in order to offset that operating spending, they identified basically 8% across the board reductions in the modal administration operating budgets. And then on top of that, then you start layering on the reductions to the capital spending. You can see state highway was the largest, followed by MTA, followed by the other modes. And then finally, the last bar was the additional revenue that could be raised, and that might include, additional bonding capacity as operating budgets are reduced. That frees up a little bit of capacity to issue more debt. And that, in a nutshell, is what how we got from September to December and where we are today.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for the presentation. I think Mr. Bishop is just here for questions. So are there any questions for Mr. McCullough or Mr. Bishop? Delegate Watson.
Thank you, Mr. McCullough. I wanted to just talk briefly about the long-term planning aspect of this. And can you sort of explain why it is important for capital projects to have a long-term planning process?
Capital projects in general and transportation in particular, capital projects have a long-term, kind of a long lead time from the time that funding is first added to a budget for preliminary planning or engineering, which helps kind of establish what the parameters would be to fix a particular problem. And it then goes through engineering until it's added to the capital program. Those first steps in the development evaluation program helps establish and get enough information that reliable project costs can be developed. Once a project goes into construction, it's generally, most major projects are 3-4 year projects. So between the implementation of it being put in and beginning of funding to the opening of that facility has, a long term or a long timeline. And the number of projects throughout the state on transportation makes the planning process a very, cumbersome but important thing to go through.
So it's important to know that there is a multi-year commitment to funding, particularly for all of these local jurisdictions. And it can be destabilizing if it's unclear whether the project has enough revenue to continue.
Yes, absolutely, because the locals have to do the same type of process for their projects And without certainty, it is difficult.
And in the worst case scenario, local jurisdictions and the state could end up spending money that basically goes to waste because they don't have the funds in the pipeline for construction.
Yes.
Okay, great. And then just briefly, Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask about the CTP process, because in the testimony from a lot of locals, we've gotten a lot of feedback about this year's CTP process. When is it typically drafted and sent to the legislature?
The draft comes out by, as required in statute, September 1st of each year.
And what exactly does the CTP contain for the public?
The CTP, or Capital Transportation Program, shows all of the capital projects that are planned for funding in the 6-year period. So as I had mentioned in the previous answer, there are many kind of steps for a project. So some of those projects are in the development evaluation, meaning they're just in the process of developing good cost estimates. Once they go to construction, it's funded over several years, because the CTP is funded on a cash flow basis.
And typically, do revenues equal the expenditures in the CTP when it is first presented?
Yes, as I had indicated at the beginning, there was only a shortfall this year because of the deviation between alignment of projects with available funding.
So one of the things that we've heard a lot of feedback on is it was frustrating for the locals, the counties and cities, to react to a CTP that wasn't balanced, as it was not this year for the first time. So when MDOT came forward with their typical roadshow, which gives the community time to react, it was unbalanced. It was unclear as to which projects were going forward or not. And I think one of the things we want to make sure is that we have a very clear process for the community, for the state's residents, who in this particular case have not had the time to react to these cuts that they would typically have. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
I think, the process is one of the things we want to try to work with MDOT in the future, so that we don't repeat this situation. It's not the best thing when people don't have time to react, especially our engineers who have a lot of other things to do, and to have to come back here again and again to try to get this straightened out. So thank you for your answers on that, Mr. Chair.
Chair of the subcommittee. Any other questions? Mr. McCullough or Mr. Bishop? Delegate Wilson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Steve, for this excellent presentation. I wanted to ask you specifically about a project that's been a signature project for this administration, as well as our federal and state delegation, which is the Baltimore Red Line. In any iteration of the CTP that we have seen this year or last year, are there any construction dollars planned for the Red Line?
There are not. However, just to be fair, it is one of those large projects that is going to need a fair amount of planning and engineering before construction dollars, meaning back in the first iteration when it was put in, it had been in the CTP for planning and development for, probably 5 or 6 years prior to the first time a CTP showed up with construction.
But the CTP is a 6-year planning document, right?
Correct.
And at no stage in our current CTP for those 6 years are there any construction dollars planned for the Red Line, correct? And just to follow up on that, the funds that MDOT and the administration announced this morning, the $150 million one-time infusion, do you know where how it came about that money was freed up?
The press release indicates that will be $150 million in general funds.
And it's not, DLS hasn't absorbed the press release from this morning, so it wouldn't really be fair to ask them to speak to it, but I'm certain we'll get it at some point and get a full briefing as to what's in it.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, my question was just simply if you can see in the documents that we've been provided to date where the construction dollars for the Red Line will come from.
No.
That's it, Mr.
Okay. Delegate Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for being here with us today. I wanted to know if you could maybe better describe kind of what projects highway user revenue is usually used for.
So highway user revenues are the state aid for local governments. It goes to counties and municipalities. And there are prescribed uses in statute. Most of the funding is used for maintenance of county and municipal owned roadways, but there are other allowances for kind of transportation related expenditures, and it varies in the statute by jurisdiction. There are a few jurisdictions that have some special exemptions that, for example, there's one that can be used on horse trails. It's not a general use for throughout the state. But generally it's transportation related that the local, the counties and the municipalities, are supporting their program.
Thank you. And I know, as Mr. Chair noted, you haven't had a chance to look at, what the reduction in restorations would look like, because this was all done on press release. But I'm definitely concerned that if my assumptions are correct, that the administration anticipates, these cuts being in the programs, the same programs in the outlying years beyond this budget year. That's a concern for what it could mean for those types of projects that you've listed. So thank you so much for that feedback.
You're welcome.
And Steve, it appears that many of the restorations that were made this morning via the press release are coming from general fund dollars. And we know that that's probably not sustainable long term. But can you give us some context historically about using general funds for TTF? So
the TTF, historically going back decades, did not get general funds. In the 2018 session, when the dedicated capital grant for WMATA was approved, the administration at that point started funding it. So the dedicated grant is a $500 million grant that went to WMATA to help improve their state of good repair. As you probably recall, years ago, 2018, correct, there were, a lot of breakdowns. There were fires being, sparked on the rate. So Maryland, Virginia, and DC, because it's a tri-state compact, agreed to provide $500 million a year as a dedicated grant for that state of good repair efforts that have been taking place since there. Since that was passed, in most years, the Maryland funding has come from general funds that have been put in the dedicated purpose account and then transferred to the Department of Transportation following enactment of the budget. So that's $167 million a year since beginning in fiscal year 2020. Other than that, most of there have been here and there small pots of money that have been added. The Blue Line Corridor in 2023, I think 8.7 million came in a supplemental budget. That's a Prince George's County, kind of a local project that they wanted support on. There's been things like that with small kind of things, but general support for the TTF has never been sought from the general fund. Which makes sense because we know that general fund has needs, public education, higher education, healthcare, and these are things, we're not here to talk about the general fund today, but the general fund has its own large shortfalls and certainly not a long-term strategy to rely on general fund dollars to pay for TTF funding. Absolutely. I guess, Mr. Bishop, if we were to come up with some revenue to sort of support the TTF, what's the lag time on that? Would we be able to sort of get revenue and pay for it right away, or would we have to sort of eat cuts, for lack of a better word, in the interim while we're waiting for those?
Yeah, if you were making changes, for example, to the existing motor fuel tax or vehicle registration fees, for example, that would be a fairly straightforward change, assuming that you were not completely rewriting the statute or something like that. If you're just changing the fees or changing the rates, that could become effective fairly quickly. You pass the legislation, if the governor chose to sign it, it could be effective July 1st, even June 1st, potentially. That would pretty quickly. If you're looking at other new revenue sources or new fees, maybe that haven't been implemented in the past, depending on the complexity of those, probably as part of your deliberations, you would want to take into effect how that would impact taxpayers, potentially administering agencies, businesses, if they are being asked to collect the new tax or the new fee. In some cases, the legislature has considered, and not always done this, but considered maybe having a lag or a delayed effective date on something, maybe having something take effect in January as opposed to July. But that would be part of your overall deliberations, I think, in looking at the fee or the tax itself.
Mixed bag depending on the fee, but certainly probably some lag should be anticipated or built
You
in
should
there.
certainly consider that, particularly for those new types of things that maybe a lot of other states have not done, or something certainly that we've not done in the
Okay,
past.
thank you. Other questions for Delegate Solomon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one question, actually I have two questions, but one just piggybacking off of what the chair was just asking you about. Is it a good habit to get into the normal practice of essentially supplanting funding from the trust fund with the general fund?
Well, I guess the whole idea of the Transportation Trust Fund as a unified funding mechanism for transportation was always that transportation revenues would be used for transportation projects. And so, that's kind of the user pay model. The difficulty comes in when there are greater needs or wants than available revenue. And at that point, it's a policy decision as to how to pay for those needs and wants.
Well, and you didn't say the exact word that I was hoping for, but it essentially adds into it an element of uncertainty. And so every year when the folks sitting behind you and our communities are trying to figure out what's going to be planned, because there isn't that revenue locked in, because the trust fund's not fully funded, there's that uncertainty. And to our colleagues' points, how do you plan a 4 or 6 year project if you know that next year the money may not be there? And the last question I was just gonna ask you, and I know that you haven't had a chance to fully absorb the press release from this morning, but just to be clear, the highway user revenue fees, the locally operated transportation system restoration, that is for 1 year only. So any of our communities sitting behind you, there is no money for FY26.
There's no guarantee there won't be, those reductions will not go into effect next year.
Correct. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Delegate. Last question, Delegate Metzger.
Madam Speaker and Mr. Chair, just to go back to piggyback off my colleague about the red line for just a moment. You said something about 6 years. So really, there's no money in that for at least 6 years.
His question was construction. So there is money in this, even in the existing CTP, not the one that goes into effect tomorrow, but the one that was January. There was planning funds that were put in for the red line. So
Legislature allocated $100 million for planning last year.
Yeah.
The legislature.
Okay. And then we said the ridership is down. Have they studied why the ridership is down? Is it because people haven't went back to work and they're working from home, or what's the?
it is varied depending on, the system, but it is fairly widespread across the United States. I mean, the pandemic caused a number of things. Increased teleworking. Because of the pandemic, many people changed their habits. They didn't want to be on, public transit at the time. And that ridership has just never come back. The latest figure I saw nationwide is the transit riderships at about 60% of pre-pandemic level. That was, kind of
Okay.
the average for across the
Just-
nation.
Just one more final thing, and I don't mean to disrespect or anything, but I just feel like this is, I know we got more to go, but this is just a Band-Aid. I'm not happy. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for being with us. It's been very instructive and we appreciate your time.
Yep, thank you.
Continued. All right, we're now joined by John Olszewski, the county executive from Baltimore County, and also the the president of MACO, current president, as well as the mayor from Baltimore City, Brandon Scott. And Mr. County Executive, you're supposed to be called by your highest title you've ever received, so I'll call you delegate here today. Welcome. Oh, and I'm sorry, Michael Sanderson from MACO is here as well. Excuse me, Michael. Nice to see you. Yep.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair Chang, Madam Speaker, always good to see you. Really appreciate the opportunity to return to the old stomping grounds. Mr. Chairman, I appreciated your remarks at the top here. I think they really spoke to me and my colleagues in local government. Proud to be here. Johnny Olszewski, in addition to serving as Baltimore County Executive, in my capacity as President of MACO. Later today, you will hear some details, not just from Mayor Scott, but also from some of my colleagues in local government about their concerns and the importance of these transportation funds and their impact both to Baltimore County residents, but residents across the state of Maryland. We do know that the proposed cuts that were originally discussed in the first panel really do impact communities across our entire state. They're concerning not only to my colleagues in county government, but my peers, and we are grateful for the committee and the speaker taking the time to allow us to have this forum to share those concerns with you. I do want to express my gratitude to the Moore administration and to Secretary Wiedefeld for also taking these issues seriously in detailing the challenging situation they faced and for remaining in regular communication with us. We also want to thank the administration for their announcement earlier today of that one-time funding that you all have been discussing. We do know that these efforts are desperately needed because, as I've said recently, we truly are in many ways facing a perfect storm of fiscal challenges. In local government, we're seeing a slowdown of revenue. We're seeing cost drivers on our massive projects, things like inflation, healthcare, energy, all the things that we buy and invest in have become much more expensive. We have many expectations in local government around things like the blueprint that we want to invest in and be a partner on, but we're being asked to do a lot, all at a time when our federal funds that were meant for one-time expenses are also drying up and really challenging us to sustain that work that many of our members of our communities have expected. The storm is particularly challenging, layering on the issue of transportation and transportation reductions. I will just put my Baltimore County hat on for 30 seconds and talk about highway user revenue. Just for example, prior to the cuts that we made back in 2009, the local share that went to Baltimore County alone was about $45 million annually. And again, we very much appreciate the one-time restoration of HUR, but those figures, even with restoration, are nowhere near the 2009 levels that we had experienced and really benefited from in Baltimore County and across the state. Our one-time fix takes Baltimore County, we believe, from about 11.5 million to 13.75. That $31 million difference over the past many years is about a $450 million difference in what Baltimore County has received. And to just put that in perspective, we recently did a comprehensive roadway analysis, and that is about the amount that's needed to put all of our roadways back to just average condition in Baltimore County. So the truth is, many of us need not only the restoration, but could use additional support, not just for our roadways, but for things like ensuring new construction on the Red Line is funded and supported in the long term. Indeed, while I'm familiar with the cases in Baltimore County, we know that we're not alone. And unfortunately, as has been pointed out by members of the committee, one-time funding means that we're back at square one again next year. So while appreciated and helpful, we do want to sort of work with all of you to make sure we're thinking about those long-term sustainable solutions so that we're not back at the conversation about the department having to offer additional cuts, reductions in commuter bus service, local transit systems, or other desperately needed projects. So the bottom line is that cutbacks mean lost service down the road, but not very far down it. So again, we appreciate the one-time funding, but we want to not lose sight, as Delegate Watson said, about having that reliability and that sustainability, because we know that in the years ahead, counties are not going to be in a position to backfill lost state support. It's going to mean a reduction in service to the people that we all serve together. So as a former member of this body, I'll just say I have a great deal of respect and appreciation and reverence for the work that you all do. We recognize that there are competing interests at play here, but I know that we are in very capable hands. And I just want to express our appreciation for this opportunity, Mr. Chairman, Madam Speaker, and members. And we look forward to, on behalf of MACO, being at the table to find those solutions with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, Madam Speaker, and entire member body. As you know, I'm Mayor Brandon Scott, the mayor of Baltimore City, and I'm here today not just with my center, I'm the point guard on our basketball team, but also with Mark Anthony Thomas from the GBC and members of my administration, because while we appreciate that we had the Moore administration announce a one-time restoration of HRO funds this morning, we cannot plan for future years without insurances of funding. We need full restoration of HUR through fiscal year 28 as the Maryland General Assembly passed last year so that major projects can move forward. And to be very blunt, Baltimore should not be facing a 63% cut to HUR, which is higher than the rest of the state combined. And the fix that we have now been proposed does not allow for us to program for our larger capital projects, properly fund MTA for state of good repair, or have planning for the much needed red line. And there have been instances before where it has been easy to balance the budget on the back of Baltimoreans. We know that previous administrations took that route, but we don't have to take that route again. But I know that you know, and that Governor Moore knows that as Baltimore goes, so does the state of Maryland. We have the opportunity, a responsibility to chart a different course and stop the legacy of putting the burden of budget cuts on the back of our most vulnerable residents. The stakes couldn't be more high. This weekend, thousands of Marylanders from across the state will come to Baltimore to cheer on the only winning football team in Maryland, the Baltimore Ravens, at a home playoff game. Yet, two of the main thoroughfares to get there, the Hanover Street Bridge and the Russell Street Viaduct, are now at risk. The condition of our aging infrastructure has been exacerbated by losing $900 million in HUR funding and approximately $3.6 billion in potential federal matching funds as a result of the cuts initiated many, many moons ago that my colleague just mentioned, which have never been restored. Beyond critical infrastructure like our bridges, 70% of our roads need to be repaved, and we have a 7-year backlog of sidewalk repairs. Since 2014, the city of Baltimore has had to take out transportation revenue bonds, contributing to the city's debt service just to do basic service. Now is not the time to roll back our progress even further. If the proposed transportation funding cuts are adopted, 190 lane miles in Baltimore City will not be resurfaced through fiscal years 25 through 28. Potentially impacted areas include Bel Air Road, 33rd Street, Northern Parkway, North Hilton, Pulaski Highway, Ashland Avenue, Oliver Street, Patterson Park Avenue, Washington Boulevard, Broadway Street, Drew Park Lake Drive, Lafayette Street, and Patapsco Avenue. If the fiscal year 25 HUR is maintained, but cuts are made in the future, 170 lane miles in Baltimore City will not be resurfaced in that time span. And as a reminder, unlike my counterpart to my left in every other jurisdiction in Maryland, Baltimore City has to repave all of our roads. None is done by state highway. So again, while we appreciate the efforts of the governor and state to make one-time restoration and acknowledge the difficult position that our governor is in, and that position is as a result of decades of disinvestment made by previous administration, we are respectively requesting that the state preserve our recently secured HUR funding formula through fiscal year 28 so that Baltimore City can recover from previous cuts to the city HUR and fully leverage the federal infrastructure bill to continue to build Baltimore's renaissance. But this is not remotely just about the health of our highways. 8 years ago, Baltimoreans who use public transportation were devastated when not only the original red line was canceled and Baltimore was literally taken off the transportation map, but also when continued cuts and disinvestment to MTA dressed up as a new bus system further worsened Baltimore's public transit issues. Though again, we appreciate the one-year solution, we must focus now on the following years in order for us not to again have subpar public transportation. 27% of Baltimore City residents do not have access to a personal vehicle. And in many of our historically disinvested neighborhoods, that number is as high as 59%. Proposed cuts that impact mass transit options disproportionately impact those who are in need of investment more than anyone else. The Charm City Circulator ridership was approximately 1.3 million passenger trips in 2023. The Harbor Connector had 230,000 trips in 2023, and 27,000 Baltimore City public students use MTA each and every day during the school year. And that is very personal for me because I was once one of them. And I had to wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning, get on the bus at 5:30 in the morning, just to go from one side of town to the next. And in fact, Mr. Chair, leaving Mervo after track practice, it was faster for me to catch the bus downtown and catch the subway back uptown and walk from the subway station to my house than it was for me to catch one bus across town. We know that our students deserve better. Everyone that lives in the region that depends on MTA deserves better. And when I talk to business leaders from downtown Baltimore to the Port of Baltimore, even out to Trade Point Atlantic, they all share the same refrain. We love having your residents work here, but they can't get here on time because they depend on MTA. This is a quality of life and a civil rights issue. Yes, this work will be tough, but tough time calls for the best leaders who will do the tough work when it's necessary to be done, so that we are investing in everyone, especially those who have been disinvested for generations. I believe and know that we have those leaders, not just in this committee, in the General Assembly, but in our governor, and look forward to working alongside each and every one of you to work towards a solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Madam Speaker, and members. I'm Michael Sanderson, Director of the Maryland Association of Counties. I wanted to add a little bit of context on highway user revenues, because this construct is not, it's unconventional in some ways. There are basically three ways that states across the country take care of the little roads, not the big highways, the smaller roads, Main Street, downtown, the roads that get you from place to place, the roads that get you home. Three models. Some states take care of it all themselves. Local governments don't have any role in that, and the equivalent of state highway comes to your hometown and patches that pothole and takes care of, if there's a safety problem, they come in and do the widening and so forth. The state does it all. We don't do that. Second model is you give the local governments who have that responsibility their own transportation revenue authority. Some places have local gas taxes or an add-on for the vehicle registrations or license plates or other things like that. That's model two. Maryland doesn't do that. But for decades and decades, we use model three, which is the state takes care of it and sends it to the locals. Where are the cars and where are the roads? We have one tax on motor fuels. We have one tax on vehicle purchases and so forth. All that goes into the gasoline and motor vehicle revenue account, and 30 cents went back to the locals. By the way, to take care of 83% of the road miles, virtually everything in Baltimore City and all those road miles that don't have numbers on them. It's just thousands and thousands. That model served Maryland great for decades. And we were comfortably in one of those three categories of how do you do this? A, B, or C? We're in group three, that's fine. I know it's 15 years ago, and that's like political paleontology in a world where 4-year cycles. I get it, but I was in this room. The real dawn didn't happen here. It happened in the Board of Public Works. The General Assembly at that time, this was the Great Recession, right? We were wave after wave of budget cuts and things were tight, things were tough. The General Assembly said, we're in a pinch. We need a local government contribution. We're going to make a couple years of cuts. We're going to dig into highway user revenues for about $100 million for each of a couple of years to help tide us over. And local governments, for the most part, said, we don't like it, but we can postpone some projects. We can do without $100 million for this year and next. We had done it under Governor Ehrlich's regime. We were prepared to suffer for 2 more years under Governor O'Malley's regime to be part of the solution. But what happened was that summer, after the General Assembly had passed the budget and the plan was balanced, Great Recession continued, and by August, the numbers were still upside down, and the Board of Public Works took 90% of the rest. 90%. The law says the Board of Public Works can cut budgets by 25%. There was a little creative arithmetic that got them through out of the whole transportation budget. It was less than 25. Local governments were on a starvation budget. And then the following year, the recession was still tough. The state budget was still upside down. And that year's budget reconciliation bill said, we're going to rebase at that number. It's starvation diet forever. So where's Maryland right now? We're not in group 1, we're not in group 2, and we're not even in group 3. we don't treat those little roads honestly. And I don't mean tiny roads, but everything that's below the numbered road in Maryland, handled by local government, handled by your leaders here. This is exactly who should be on this panel. Baltimore City has more at stake in the current cuts than everybody else put together. And a county like Baltimore County is further behind than anyone else. They don't get the benefit of incorporated municipalities who have gotten a little bit more boost than others. Towson doesn't get the same treatment as Rockville. We are upside down on managing local roads. These cuts make it worse, but we are already circling the drain on this. So it is red alert stuff for your colleagues and your partners in local government. We are grateful for the one-time parachute, but as you've heard multiple times over, Band-Aid, that's all we got right now. So this is a major issue for your partners in local government, and you'll hear programmatic stuff from folks who are yet to follow.
Yep, and to follow, we have folks from many jurisdictions to talk about on the ground and how this could affect them and projects as well, not just the HUR, not just MTA, not just WMATA. We do have some questions, Delegate Grice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Michael, I know we're talking a lot about roads, but in a lot of our, especially our rural jurisdictions, bridges, I mean, if those don't get replaced, what happens to them?
Yeah, we all know. I mean, an enormous amount, like highway user revenue is the euphemism, right? Governments are good at making alphabet soup and that sort of thing. HUR doesn't sound like anything. It's day-to-day maintenance, it's safety improvements, it's filling potholes, it's plowing snow. I mean, that's quality of life stuff for everybody in Maryland. And the safety of our bridges, I mean, the count of structurally unsound bridges we have across the state has enormously jumped in the time since 2009, when we shut off the spigot for all that local support. So we're in a bad place.
Yeah, I was a county commissioner 10, 15 years ago, and we had 3 bridges that were completely out, and you have to close the entire road if the bridge is out, right? They still haven't been replaced yet. And mainly because of the historical perspective, what we did during the O'Malley years. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. We have one of our newest members. Welcome, Delegate Ruff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Sanderson, thank you guys, all of 3 of you, for your presentation and for your comments. Mr. Mayor, as you know, we grew up 8 blocks apart, so I remember jumping on the M3 to the 44 to get to Gilman School and understand those troubles. Mr. Sanderson, if I could ask you, if we could go back a little bit to the CTP, can you give us an understanding in your experience representing local governments, how the CTP roadshow was different this year in your view than in prior years?
I think you can probably hear nuts and bolts on this from some panels that are to follow and my colleagues on the panel. I will say, you've already heard from your professional staff, from the General Assembly's professional staff, the unique circumstance of this year's CTP in draft being an all-consuming list of projects rather than a refined list. And if part of the annual process of having a draft CTP is to gather community response, this project is in, this project is delayed, this project is out, and the community can respond to that and say, now, oh, that's going to be, if we have to wait 3 more years for this important project, that's going to be a problem in this community. And the department, in theory, the structure is for them to hear that. I think you miss some of that with the lack of specificity with the broad list this year, with still everything still on the CTP and it being out of balance. It makes it less of a useful document for community input. So that's, I mean, when we say the process was different this year, I think that's where it's most consequential.
Understood. Can you give us a sense from a high level, and I know we're going to hear from from all the municipalities that are here, can you give us a high level understanding of how and to what extent our local governments rely on the CTP and on it being balanced and on it being timely?
Right. Well, the CTP is the vision for the large projects that for the most part are out of the grasp of even your largest local jurisdictions. Like there's no way that this mayor can orchestrate a new transit line within Baltimore City with local resources. Those things have to be a collaboration with the state and with federal partners. There's no way projects of that magnitude, the capacity projects that are in the CTP and so forth, those have to happen through a statewide vision. So local leaders are consulted, the department goes, the whole roadshow process is visiting local jurisdictions, seeing things on the ground, getting a list of priorities from each area. And those will be a combination of, here's the big project, but here are some smaller issues that might be easier to reach financially, and here are the consequences of those. You can hear that more readily through input with local leaders than you can with professional engineers consolidated in the State Department. I think that's what you get out of that process. When the draft comes out and doesn't say these are the 20% of these projects that actually aren't going to be able to get funded in these next 6 years, you lose that ability to engage on those issues on the margin. And that's usually where a lot of the conversation lies.
Right. And based on what you're hearing, how are local governments really dealing with this, or how are they navigating, based on the feedback you're getting, the unbalanced budget, and the lack of time to really plan, based on the release of the CTP?
I guess I would say we've been in uncertainty and maybe alarm mode since early December. So I mean, the secretary and the administration reached out and said, we're out of kilter. You just got a very, very clear presentation of how September to December made this problem worse. And the notion that would turn into an across all modes, including local support solution over the years to come. And that it might be this stark of a hit on highway user revenue and on local operated transit systems. It ends up with jurisdictions who are already upside down in their budget. Like you just heard about Baltimore County, every county has a similar story of soft revenues, driving costs, and expectations that are high, and federal support disappearing. So everybody's already in the middle of that. The idea of, well, now presented with how can you backfill a state cut like that? And I think many of our local jurisdictions are talking about this will turn into service cuts as opposed to reallocate from somewhere else. So we had a conference like a few days, a conference of county leaders on the Eastern Shore just a few days after these announcements. And this was what everybody's talking about in every hallway at that event. So this is top line stuff for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Ralph. Great questions. Any other questions for this panel? Delegate Watson.
Yes, thank you. Just before you all take your seats, in general, I wondered if you could respond to the impact of on the cuts that we're seeing in the large projects, which we're going to hear about next. How does the delay of these projects impact potential federal funding?
Well, I think, and thank you for the question, and I think we might lose it, right? That's the reality. It might not be there much longer. We have the stars aligned right now to pull down lots and lots and lots of federal funding. I think we all have a front row seat to the insanity that happens in DC from time to time. And we don't know how long we're going to have that. And that means that these projects that have been long standing, that should have been fixed 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago in some instances, will have to wait. And at some point, one of those bridges will fail. One of those things will crumble. And then it will be on all of us for not doing the tough work and just waiting until things got better. We have to do the tough work now.
I won't repeat the mayor's comments. I'll just add, you're going to hear from some colleagues in Baltimore County one of those major projects has literally been the #1 priority that we've shared with MDOT for 15 years in a row. 15 years. That was before 2009 cuts. That was before the Great Recession. So not only do we risk losing the federal support, but it goes back to your point about, I think, certainty, Delegate. And I appreciate the question.
Thank you.
Certainly seems like the time to solve this is now. We're hearing from that from you loud and clear. So we appreciate that very much.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you all for being with us very much and your leadership. We're now going to turn to the various counties to talk about projects and what these cuts mean to them. We're going to go in twos to try to keep this moving along. We'll start with Emil Wallinen from Montgomery County and Vic Weisberg from Prince George's. Come on up and you guys please testify together in tandem.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Madam Speaker, and members of the committee. My name is Emma Bolannon. I'm the Deputy Director and Chief Operating Officer for the Montgomery County Department of Transportation. My presentation today, I was planning on coming here and showing you the extent of our the impact of the reductions in the state CTP to our program specifically. The announcement by the governor this morning has greatly changed that scenario, but I think it would still be helpful for you to see the what if scenario. We are extremely appreciative of the governor's restoration of these one-time funds. But as you've heard from the other members in the panels before us, much more needs to be done to make this a long-term fix. We don't feel like we should be coming back here year after year to deal with short-term solutions. Part of the discussion, so let me just tee things up and walk through. The greatest impact to us in Montgomery County would have been the reductions of the lots funding. As you know, in Montgomery County, there are services that are provided by the Ride-on Bus service, as well as both Metro Rail and Metro Bus. Those are an integrated set of services. As part of the governor's CTP, there was a fix to WMATA's federal or WMATA's fiscal cliff. There was $150 million dedicated towards WMATA, but that was somewhat coming at the expense of Montgomery County's riders because there was a reduction to transit services in Montgomery County. If you look at these simple charts, try to make this a little bit more visual, the blue portions of these pie charts represent what Metro Bus provides in the county. The green are what Montgomery County Ride-on provides. As you can see, in terms of the number of routes provided, the miles of service that are provided, and the hours of service, we provide almost 75% of the transit services in Montgomery County. The ridership is a little bit different. Metro Bus handles about 45%. The other portion is Montgomery County. As you get down onto the lower side, you see the cost of the services, what Metro spends to provide those services, those approximately quarter of the services, they're nearly 40% of the costs. Montgomery County is much more efficient in the provision of the services. And the last chart on the bottom that you see is the script is kind of flipped in terms of what subsidy is provided to Metro Bus riders versus Montgomery County Ride-on riders. Simply at the bottom right, the funding that we get through a combination of the state provides about a $2.72 subsidy to riders in Montgomery County and about $6 to Metro riders. The cuts and the additions that were proposed for Metro, the cuts to the LOTS program and the additions to Metro, would have changed that script to about almost an $11 subsidy to Metro riders and a reduction in the subsidy to about $1.59 to Montgomery County residents. It goes without saying probably that the riders that are experiencing that rely on transit are the most vulnerable. The average salary of a transit rider in Montgomery County is probably about a third of the average median income in Montgomery County. These are people that rely on transit. They usually have no other options. So in general, what would this $17.4 million reduction of lots if it hit Montgomery County? It would have been about 11% service reduction to transit riders in Montgomery County, up to about 160,000 hours of service, affecting about 1 million riders on those 43 routes that would have been affected. This would have eliminated jobs. This is not jobs of people, going to the hospital or workers at a hotel. This is actual transit positions, the drivers, the supervisors, about 100 positions in Montgomery County would have probably had to be cut associated with this budget. It would have delayed our ability to replace the fleet. The discussion I heard earlier, the question about how would this affect federal funds? We are attempting to go after capital investment grant funds for our bus rapid transit system. Delaying our fleet means that we get a lower rating and lessens our ability to compete for those federal funds for a brand new service, construction and services that would be provided. We would have had to defer the quality of our existing services, less timely on those routes. And we probably would have had to increase our fare that we just recently, coming out of COVID, was able to lower from $2 to $1 per rider. We would have probably had to reinstitute that $2 fare back to our rider. Also, all of our programs that offer either free or reduced services to the disabled, seniors, youths, all of those programs would have been affected. This is just a sample of some of the services. The darker areas on this chart you see are the more vulnerable residents, the more poverty-stricken areas that are not well covered with automobile usage by the residents that ride transit. Again, I had talked about some of the subsidy analysis that was done previously. We greatly appreciate what the governor had done to fix Metro's problem. Metro is critical to the region's success and to the residents of Montgomery County, what it does for the region's economy. So that in and of itself, we greatly appreciate it. But doing that at the expense of other transit agencies that are integrated and provide for one transit system, not so appreciative of that in action. On the highway user revenue side, Montgomery County, it's probably not as impactful, but it is impactful. You heard about the kinds of things that happen with that highway user revenue. That highway user revenue that we get as a distribution goes into our general fund. It's not, our general fund operating budget is more like $60 million. This pales in comparison to what we're doing, but many of our municipalities, it is their transportation budget. The reductions there are a $1 reduction in the services that they provide, nearly just under $1 million to just Rockville and Gaithersburg in terms of the impact of their services that they provide. In terms of other projects, the state Purple Line, we appreciate the commitment to finish that project, and the funds that were added or necessary to keep that project on track. And again, greatly appreciative of the additional subsidy that was committed to WMATA. However, there were other programs that are still at risk with some of these, some of the cuts as part of the now, $3.15 billion reduction. The commuter bus service in the county, planned mark improvements, just the state of the right-of-way, snow removal services that we saw this morning. The elimination of construction funding. There was a project on just on Georgia Avenue, just inside the Beltway. There was some money teed up for construction in the outer years of the CPTP. All that money has been eliminated. So there is no plan to now get that project underway, let alone finish it. We don't quite fully understand the impacts of the funding reduction for the American Legion Bridge 270 project, as the state is still trying to kind of reimagine that project. And we would have seen no other progress on any other of the county's priorities. Again, the most impactful thing to us would have been the lots funding. We appreciate the restoration of that, and the restoration of the highway user revenue. And that wraps up my comments. Thank you, everyone.
Take Prince George's, and then we'll take you both questions with the panel at the end. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Barnes and members of the committee and Madam Speaker. Thank you for this opportunity to speak before you and share Prince George's County's perspective and impacts if the budget cuts proposed by the Maryland Department of Transportation are to be implemented. For the record, I am Victor Weisberg, Special Assistant to the Director and Major Projects Manager for the Prince George's County Department of Public Works and Transportation. On behalf of County Executive Angela Also Brooks, we want to also thank Governor Moore for restoring the over $4.8 million of FY25 locally operated transit systems or lots funding allocated to Prince George's County. Restoration of this critical transit funding demonstrates the state's commitment to work in partnership with local jurisdictions, prioritize transit needs, and invest in equitable distribution of resources. However, in finalizing the FY24 through 29 CTP, there should be focus on recognizing the inextricable link to not only the jurisdictions in Maryland, like Prince George's County, but to those, how that works within the context of the larger region, and how decisions made to the CTP can be done in a manner that creates true synergy with an eye on opportunities. Prince George's County is in a unique and pivotal position. We sit at the eastern portion of the Washington region, which is not only the fastest growing, both in population and economic impact within the state of Maryland, but also one of the most burgeoning and recession resilient regions in the nation. The CTP provides us with an opportunity to make vital investments in our transit systems, especially rail. Prince George's County has 15 underdeveloped metro stations and several MARC stations. Several recent studies reflect the trend of an increase in employment in the western part of the Washington region, outside Maryland, and increase in population in Prince George's County, which also explains why these studies also show the greatest increases in travel time by car are to hit Prince George's County residents the hardest. The county expresses its sincere appreciation for recent support from the state in securing the selection of Greenbelt for the new FBI headquarters and working closely as a partner on efforts like New Carrollton and the Blue Line Corridor. Continuing, not hindering this momentum is crucial. Speaking of the Blue Line Corridor, we are aware that funds for planning and design will remain in place, and we will continue to work towards a design that is pedestrian friendly. The proposed $55.244 million in cut of construction funding for the Medical Center Drive interchange, which was initially slated to break ground in FY27, is alarming. This new bridge project is a linchpin to the county's economic development strategy and is central to enabling full build out of the medical center development, optimal development in and around the Garrett Morgan station, and part of our retention effort of keeping the commanders at FedEx Field. The Medical Center Drive Bridge project is fabric for the entire Blue Line Corridor project, the county which is the county executive's flagship initiative. Without the CTP funding necessary for capacity and facilities, the anticipated congestion without that project has the full potential to stymie development projects throughout the corridor. Now is not the time to delay. Given its significance, this project truly needs to be funded. Additionally, it is important to be able to provide confidence to investors whose projects are counting on this interchange being in use, that this project will not be delayed. While the county is appreciative of the lots funding restoration, we strongly recommend that MDOT be more strategic in addressing the state's fiscal shortfall for subsequent fiscal year budgets. Funding should be centered around investments that have the greatest potential for future growth, with an emphasis on underutilized transit-oriented development and, more importantly, equity. Even with the county's pledge from the state to provide $150 million to WMATA, which we very much appreciate and are grateful, WMATA still proposes to significantly cut transit service throughout Prince George's County. We look forward to continued discussions about how we can partner with the state to lessen the impact of WMATA cuts on the county. We strongly encourage the state to look at the CTP as an opportunity to leverage strategic investments designed to grow the economy while enhancing equity and sustainability in a manner that best positions the county and the state to optimize positive outcomes for all. Thank you very much for allowing the opportunity to come speak to you and to share what we believe is the best approach, not just for the county, but for the entire state.
Thank you very much, both of you, for being with us. Any questions for this panel? Delegate Lewis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank you both for your comments. So to preface my question, I live along the Blue Line corridor. I lived there my entire life. I represent the community that's lived in the shadow of the now Commander Stadium. And just for a little bit of context, the first idea of a Blue Line corridor goes back to the late 90s. So it's not like a new idea. But it's a transformational transit-oriented plan that we fought really hard to get the WMATA to extend out to Largo as part of this, going back a long time. I'd like you to explain a little bit how, for the people who drive along, particularly Arena Drive, trying to get in and out of the hospital that we just made that investment there, or get into a game, how delaying this project and having no funding for it. Again, we really appreciate the restored funds, but how this will affect their daily lives and commutes a little bit.
As I mentioned, it's really this sort of portion of Prince George's County that has among the longest commute times within the region already. And as Delegate Lewis has very articulately, very clearly stated, the importance of the Blue Line corridor and Largo to not just Prince George's County, but the region. It is really critical to not stop the momentum that has already been created with the Regional Hospital Center, but also future developments in that area, which we, are very, very excited about, but certainly do not want to scare off. And if, there are concerns and fears from potential developers that, congestion may make their model a little different, we don't want anything to stand in its way. And we think that we're, right on the precipice of something really, really big and transformative. So we strongly would like to encourage continued construction funding for that project to keep that momentum going.
Mr. Chair, if I can, one follow-up. The only other thing I wanted to add to that, as you know, the Blue Line corridor, the 400+ million that we secured, has inspired close to $1 billion in private investment along the corridor, which is great. I think you were hinting at, the challenging environment that businesses are with the high interest rates that we have already to doing any type of construction or transformative environment. Can you just talk to a little bit about like the experience of the people who are choosing to invest along that corridor and the type of, I think, depressing sentiment it would show if we are pulling back the investment from the state?
Thank you. As I think your question is implying, we in the last few years are just beginning to sort of see this sort of major investment in areas like Largo and the Blue Line corridor, getting the FBI in Greenbelt, the investment in New Carrollton. If there are any signals to potential developers, we just think that could have some negative impact and investors, and this is a corridor that has tremendous transit dependent individuals. There are food deserts within the corridor. So it truly is, the benefit of improving this corridor really will transcend and lift up, individuals who really need it and provide greater access, both, by vehicle, by transit, but most importantly, hopefully, employment opportunities nearby. So we just think that there's real synergy that will be created by, this project and related projects, and really would hate to see, that momentum stymied at all.
Thank you for your remarks, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We're gonna have two more questions for this panel, then we're gonna turn to Baltimore County, Delegate Shetty and then Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both for being here today, and welcome to District 18's constituent, Mr. Weisberg. We love having you here, and thank you for the good work you're doing in gorgeous Prince George's. So I want to ask two sets of questions very briefly. So one, I really appreciate the slide on the highway user fees impact to municipalities in Montgomery County. District 18 is home to 8 municipalities listed here. The total reduction would deeply impact their local transportation budgets. So just want to, I guess, comment and brief question. This was, we believe, restored today for this year, but then next year, again, we are potentially back in this same position, correct?
That's correct. That's our understanding. And that's why, again, we cannot stress enough how long-term fixes or long-term solutions of the transportation trust funds, declining revenue base need to occur.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And then the last question I had was related to a project that I know Delegate Solomon, myself, and our district, along with District 20, has been working closely with the county and the state on, which is the construction of the MD 97 Montgomery Hills project. Just sort of for others here, Delegate Solomon and I, when we were first elected, were invited into some residents' homes who shared a map from the 1970s planning board that had this project there. I mean, it has been a long-standing plan and commitment from our community to construct this. So we were very excited when we've made some progress, and just curious what the elimination of the construction funding means for the long-term viability of this project.
I think in a single word, uncertainty. At least what was reflected in the CTP showed the start of construction. Beyond 6 years, you would imagine or assume that those funds were coming along and the project would continue. Now there is no certainty of when that project would get underway and then get completed.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see Delegate Solomon's light has gone off. Great. Thank you, sir. Thank you both for being with us. Appreciate it. We're going to now turn to Baltimore County. I see Mr. Sid here, and anyone else, come on up and welcome.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Barnes and members of the committee. My name is Samir Sid, Deputy Administrative Officer for Economic Development and Infrastructure in Baltimore County. Before I start, I want to acknowledge, like many others have, the department's efforts and their plan to restore $150 million in cuts into this budget. Every little bit helps, and we appreciate their effort to find those funds and put them back in the budget. With that said, we've been asked here today to present on the impacts of transportation cuts to Baltimore County. But the reality is we know less about the impacts of this budget on our residents than we ever have before at this point in the process. As it stands, we have an unbalanced draft budget and summary information on how this year's budget gap will be closed. But the detail on jurisdictional impacts that would normally be available in September is still yet to be published, and we expect that to come out finally tomorrow. Based on the information we do have, we anticipate that the cuts needed to balance the draft CTP will have a dramatic impact on our county. Director Walker will talk about this in a bit more detail, but the Dolefield Road interchange project, which has been the county's top transportation priority for the last 15 years, received a deferral of over $17 million in construction funding from FY 28 to FY 29 in the draft CTP. Given that nearly $440 million in major expansion project cuts are anticipated in the final draft that we'll see tomorrow, there could potentially be an additional reduction to this critical and long-standing priority of the county. Across the county, there are nearly 8.2 billion vehicle miles traveled in Baltimore County each year, which is second only to Prince George's County in the state of Maryland. The summary gap closing measures that were posted in December describe over $650 million in reductions to maintenance and state of good repair projects on state highways. While the restoration of highway user revenue cuts in this year's budget will provide some relief, and we're appreciative of that, the ongoing reductions and delays to state of good repair projects will have a disproportionate impact on our residents, given the amount of driving that occurs in our county each year. Moving to transit, Baltimore County is the home to nearly 1,200 MTA bus stops, which represents over a quarter of MTA bus stops system-wide. Though again, it's unclear what the precise impacts will be, it's reasonable to expect that the anticipated $98 million in operating cuts to MTA will have some impact on the effective operation of MTA's bus service. We certainly appreciate the emphasis this budget is placing on east-west rail transit through the revival of the Red Line and the East Baltimore County Access Study. With that said, though, MTA bus service still represents the best short-term opportunity to connect residents around the region to the over 12,000 jobs being created at Trade Point Atlantic. The anticipated $217 million in additional capital reductions just to MTA bus decrease the likelihood that additional express bus options will be made to correct workers across the region to these new opportunities. We're also home to 9 light rail stops in Baltimore County, which serve many major county employers, including over 2,500 employees at McCormick in Hunt Valley. Just last month, we saw the disruptive impact of service shutdowns on the light rail to these workers. Yet the anticipated budget balancing measures reduce capital spending on light rail by $78 million in this budget, which would likely delay or cut many state of good repair projects that could prevent service shutdowns like this before they occur. Last, our administration has made great efforts to expand transit access by investing in our own locally operated transit systems. These investments have helped establish the Towson Loop and have allowed us to advance studies to establish similar last mile connectors in Owings Mills and Catonsville. Expansion of our LOTS program could dramatically increase transit ridership by connecting our workers and residents to major MTA transit hubs. Despite opportunities to increase transit ridership in the Baltimore region's largest jurisdiction, Baltimore County receives under $1 million annually in operating funding for its LOTS program. That's less than counties like Allegheny, St. Mary's, and Washington, who combined have less than 40% of the population of our jurisdiction alone. For years, we've requested that the department reconsider its LOTS formula and account for factors like population and potential growth in ridership. Despite MDOT's promise to release and implement a new formula, this budget maintains the same formula for yet another year. In lieu of operating increases for our LOTS programs, we've actually identified one-time federal funding sources that can help provide the capital investments we'll need to start implementing last mile connectors in other locations across the county. Yet to date, the department hasn't made available federal funding sources like carbon reduction funds to support LOTS expansion in the state or in the county more specifically. So in short, we're still assessing the impacts of the cuts associated with this budget on Baltimore County, but we expect there to be significant impacts to our motorists, our transit users, our workers, and our employers. We think there's some opportunities to support the county and local governments across the state, specifically through one-time grants to support LOTS programs. And we look forward to working with the department as we navigate a challenging budget cycle. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and Madam Speaker. My name is Deandra Walker, and I'm the Director for Public Works and Transportation for Baltimore County. Baltimore County has been committed to improving transit opportunities so that our residents can move more easily around, and so we can reduce our impact on the planet. Baltimore County is continuing to grow. We have some 850,000 residents, making us the 3rd largest county in the state. We need more transportation options and better ones. We believe Baltimore County's transportation infrastructure should continue to grow and help create safe, vibrant, inclusive communities with ease to transportation opportunities no matter where you live or work. We believe in creating a more connected central Maryland region and the need for east-west connectivity, because residents should have the regional solutions rather than being confined to jurisdictional lines or a single part of the county. Baltimore County residents need more important state resources, period. Every year for the last 15 years, we have made the Dolefield Interchange in Owens Mills a top transportation priority in our CTP requests. This project calls for widening of the 795 interchange between Dolefield and Franklin Boulevard. The project specifically will save residents 5+ minutes in the southbound travel time, 12+ minutes in the northbound travel time, and save 2,100+ hours of daily per day during peak hours. This project was recently defunded for a second time. To grow our economy and to serve our growing population, Baltimore County has created its first fixed route transit bus service, the Circulator. Unfortunately, we didn't do this with lots funding, because for years, Baltimore County, as you have heard, has historically received less state funding than other jurisdictions of similar size. We continue to urge MDOT to provide additional lots funding to support the operation of our locally transit services. Baltimore County received less than $500,000 in operating support this last year as well as the year before. We understand the underlying formula is being evaluated, and we're hopeful that any potential adjustments will address the historical disparities. Our county remains the top job center in the region and the second largest job center in the state, with more than 21,000 businesses employing nearly 380,000 workers. Baltimore County residents are just as deserving of these important state resources, and it will help us create the first and last mile connections within our region. We are committed to further expanding transit in Baltimore County, but we can only do it with the state as a partner with us, as it has with Maryland's other jurisdictions. We certainly understand the current and fiscal budget constraints for MDOT and the CTP. But as we face these new realities, we urge legislators and the administration to focus scarce resources toward population centers. Otherwise, look at what we're doing in Central Baltimore. Understand the need that we have in Central Baltimore and focus the funds that are needed. We appreciate you for listening to us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you both for being with us. Any questions, Delegate Forbes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. On the Dolefield exchange, which is the exchange that the county executive referenced, 15 years in the waiting. What does another delay in that mean to Baltimore County and to the people that live there? And what's behind it? Like, stacked behind it are probably other projects that you can't move to because of that. So if you discuss that for me, I'd appreciate it.
Definitely. I would say that we've only seen the congestion in the Owens Mills area get worse and worse over the years. We have more businesses that are growing in the Owens Mills area, but they're at jeopardy because everybody can see there's one way in and really only one way out, and that congestion is causing more heartburn for the business roundtable and the residents within the Owens Mills area. And that's why it has been a request of ours for the last 15 years. As I mentioned earlier, at one time we did have some planning money in the CTP. We thought we were on our way. That was taken. We continue to put it back into the CTP as a #1 project. We actually didn't focus on other projects because we knew that this was so important to the county. We got it in there, and now we no longer have the construction funding.
Thank you. And that area was designated as a growth area and has been really successful that way. And so this would help alleviate the traffic there. I've been stuck in the traffic there,
Yeah.
so I know exactly what you're saying. So thank you.
Delegate McCaskill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you too for being here. My concern is one of our Baltimore County projects, and that's with the I-70 695 project. So I'm curious, we already know that we haven't had great state highway safety there. We have congestion, road rage, etc. So literally this project has been a matter of life and death for us in that area. So I'm concerned about the impact of future construction costs for that project.
So I-70 and 695 is, of course, a state project. So I wouldn't know the actual construction costs associated with that project, but I will tell you that it will be impacted in that area because that's also where the red lines will possibly come. So one of the alternatives will possibly impact how they do whatever they're going to do at the I-70 and 695 interchange.
Thank you.
And I can add a little bit to that. Every year we're seeing cost escalations in the nature of 5 to 10% by year. So anything that gets pushed out will cost more in the future. The other thing I'd say about that area in particular, we've invested a lot of time, effort, and funding into a plan to revitalize Security Square, and that infrastructure and that access is what makes that site attractive for potential redevelopment. And so the longer that sits out there and is not executed, the harder it is to actually attract investment into that area.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Let me just take a minute to pause for 1 second to again thank our speaker who's been with us for an hour and a half. And I think that speaks volumes that a speaker has been here an hour and a half and how important these issues are. And we appreciate you. She's got other meetings to get to, but thanks again, Madam Speaker, for joining us today. Delegate Mangione.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both for being here. And a quick question. I was going over the north-south feasibility study, and I just wanted, in your role, if you can confirm my understanding that the idea of the light rail going from up York Road is definitely out, correct? Have you heard that or no? From MDOT?
Yeah, so I know that they've recently revised the study and they've taken quarters out of it. I believe you're correct. I don't have the map in front of me, but I think they pulled York out. Yeah.
All right. Well, good to hear that. I guess my other question was kind of following up. You had mentioned how long was the light rail down? I did read that it was down, but heading up to the Hunt Valley, and you mentioned McCormick.
It was down, I think, 3 weeks to a month.
Really?
Yeah. We found out in early December. I think it came back right around New Year's.
Is there, I guess, data or is there conversations with what that impact was for all the surrounding business in terms of, you said 2,500 people, yeah, McCormick has a beautiful, huge headquarters there, and of course, the Hunt Valley Town Center. I'm just curious to know about the amount of usage from the light rail.
The aggregated
part of the county.
The aggregated data by business, we don't have that yet. I know McCormick,
Feedback.
we had done a site visit to McCormick in early December, just as this shutdown was announced. And they estimated that roughly a third of their factory workers use light rail to get to work each and every day. And if you go out to the site, you'll understand why. It's right there.
Yeah. No, yeah, you can walk across the street
You can walk
to get there. Yeah.
it was tremendously impactful to businesses, specifically in that Hunt Valley, Lutherville corridor and so forth, where there's great access, to workplaces.
And that's good. And I have no reason to doubt that. I hope that's correct, because I mean, a lot of the complaints I get that there's not a lot, at least when people, and of course, not like they're sitting there all day monitoring the light rail, but a lot of people will give feedback that the amount of usage is minimum in that part of the county. But at least I like hearing the fact that, your conversations with the businesses there suggest otherwise.
Yeah. And I think it depends on the time of day too. And so commute to work is different than commute for recreation, but definitely the folks in McCormick confirm that usage was a very, very big deal to them.
We could, if offline, I would love to see some of those numbers just for my own knowledge. Thank you.
Yeah.
You, Delegate Mangione. Thank you both for being with us. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
I think we'll now turn to, let's hear from Arundel County and St. Mary's County. Sam Sneed, Brian Ulrich, John Hausler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Vice Chair and all the elected officials here listening to this presentation. It shows the importance of these transportation issues to our state and specifically to our county as well. I just wanted to go over the impacts on the proposed CTP with you on our local county roads and our transit, large-scale projects moving forward. But before I begin, I do want to say that I am thankful for the one-year bridge, which allows for the opportunity to develop possible legislative actions for a well-funded transportation trust fund moving forward. So the largest impacts are to our roadway maintenance, as you saw with other counties, from the highway user revenue funds, our operations from the lots funding, but also to commuter bus service. A lot of our residents utilize that service, and by cutting the commuter bus service, you cut off lines between Arundel County and Baltimore City and Washington, D.C. But one of the biggest projects that would be impacted is I-97, and it has a system-wide effect because of the shape and geography of our county, and I'll go into that further in the presentation. So with the reduction in the highway user revenues, we have a reduction of $1.38 million, which impacts our capability to maintain roads. As was said before, that's patching potholes, that's creating safety initiatives to create better crossings, building out sidewalks. So it has a direct daily impact on roadway users. Over the past few years, we've really started to build out our locally operated transit in Anne Arundel County. Our county executive has made a substantial investment, not only growing our transit system with new transit lines and new transit zones, but completely subsidizing these and allowing it to be fare-free. By reducing the lots funding, it inhibits our ability to grow further, and also inhibits our ability to implement some of the inter and intra-county lines that we partnered on to plan for in the future with counties like Prince George's County and Howard County, which border us. As you can see here, there are several lines that provide commuter bus service between Anne Arundel County and Washington, D.C., but also to Baltimore City. When you cut the funding for these lines, people who've made conscientious choices to live within our county that have to commute to these areas will no longer have that same access. I've received several personal stories from residents about how this will be a real problem for them in terms of gaining access to their places of work. One of the largest impacts is I-97 Tismo. Some of you may have taken 97 on the way here. It may not have been as congested today due to the school closings and many offices being closed, but it is one of our most congested corridors. And because of the unique shape of our county and the waterways, we have other roadway systems that parallel I-97, Route 2 and Route 3. The Tismo project that was planned would have widened 97, which would have a direct impact on relieving congestion on those parallel roadways, which are really meant to be local state routes and not handle the capacity that a high-speed roadway like I-97 does. And by removing this project from the CTP, you again create additional congestion and growing congestion on those corridors. Other local roadway projects that could be delayed as a result of this are Maryland Route 2, Ritchie Highway, Crane Highway, Route 3, and Maryland 214. Our county executive has made a substantial investment of local dollars in the planning and engineering for these projects. And we're hopeful that the promise of future construction dollars would come as a result. With the change in the CTP, we would see a delay in the construction of these projects, which would directly affect our county residents. I do want to thank you for your time, and I want to open it up for any questions that you may have for me about the specific impacts to Anne Arundel County of the proposed cuts.
Thank you. And let's take questions at the end after.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, fellow members of the Appropriations Committee. My name is John Sterling Hauser, Deputy County Attorney for St. Mary's County, joined here at the bench with Mr. Jim Gotch, our Director of Public Works and Transportation. Thank you for the opportunity to get out of the office and make a drive up to Anne Arundel County to testify to you about the effects these proposed cuts may have on a smaller, more rural county like St. Mary's County. We'll say, adjusting the testimony a bit in real time, we arrived in Annapolis to find out that the changes to our own lots program, the adjustments to highway user revenues, and the adjustment to commuter bus services, all of which would have impacted St. Mary's County, look like they've been restored for at least 1 year. We're grateful for that, though certainly join in what our colleagues have said this afternoon about wanting to make sure that our stay of execution for 1 year might hopefully find some permanency to it in the coming years. What is still left on the table, though, what we are still adjusting to after when the overview of potential changes to the CPT came out in early December, is an adjustment to one local project that will be of great significance to St. Mary's County. It's what we'd like to take our time this afternoon to talk to you about. That is the Maryland Route 5 reconstruction project, the construction money for which is in danger of being cut from the final DOT CTP. That project, construction of which was slated to begin in late 2025, early 2026, concerns an intersection in Great Mills, a priority funding Maryland in immediate proximity to Naval Air Station Patuxent River, a Webster Outlying Landing Field, Great Mills High School, 5 elementary schools, countless small businesses, and probably a few thousand residential homes as well, and probably the immediate 1.5 2 mile radius of that intersection. That current intersection, which was last worked on in the mid-1990s, sees approximately 25,888 trips a day, and it is failing. It is not uncommon to see backups last for over a mile, impacting all the institutions I just ran through, as well as making major quality of life impacts on those residences and businesses. The Maryland Route 5 reconstruction project itself consists of 5 coordinated complementary infrastructure investments addressing the growing challenges impacting that immediate area. Those 5 components are the widening of Maryland Route 5 from 2 lanes to 4 lanes between the intersection of Maryland Route 5 and the quarter mile and Route 247 and the quarter mile stretch that goes then to Flatiron Road on Route 5. It calls for the adding of 5-foot wide bicycle lanes to that road. It calls for the adding of 5-foot wide pedestrian sidewalks to both sides of that stretch of road. It calls for replacing an existing bridge over the St. Mary's River that was originally built in 1913. And it calls for implementing drainage improvements, stormwater management, and stream restoration to the area. The total financial cost of all that is estimated by State Highway Administration right now to be $26.5 million. Breaking down that $26.5 million, $4.6 million is estimated to be the cost of design and acquisition, most of which, if not all of which, has already been completed by the state. The remaining $21.9 million would be for the construction costs. The sunk costs, as I mentioned, what we would be without if this project were removed are that $4.6 million that's already been spent on design and acquisition. Over the last 3 or 4 years or so, State Highway Administration has been hard at work acquiring the land and acquiring the right of ways to accomplish that widening in the other projects. That's involved the acquisition of property. That's also involved the relocation of some existing businesses and uses that were on that property already. It's also calling for the design work. Of the remaining $21.9 million construction costs, I'll note for the benefit of the committee, that is already above the $17 million in construction costs this project was originally contemplated to cost back in 2020. The estimated continuing dollar cost, if this project is either delayed or cut entirely, would, depending on the inflation factor we use, be, if you go by the historical average, the 20-year average of 2.31%, you'd be looking at an additional cost of roughly $505,000 a year to the taxpayers of Maryland. If you go by the actual inflation costs we've seen in the last year from 2022 to 2023, which are closer to 5%, it is just shy of 1.1 million per year in additional costs. And those are only the direct financial costs. Those fail to take into effect the continuing community impacts. Failure to address this project in the manner called in the original schedule would take. As I mentioned, the intersection lies in close proximity to Naval Air Station Patuxent River and Webster Field. Approximately 21,500 active duty personnel, civilians, and contractors work at those facilities each day, many of whom depend on Route 247 and the access gotten to it by Route 5 to get to work. That Naval Air Station comprises, or directly or indirectly is responsible for about 75 to 80% of our local economy in St. Mary's County. And improving access to the base and improving its functionality is vital to St. Mary's County's economic future. Roughly 4 o'clock each day when work lets out on that base, the intersection chokes up. It is the only road leading directly to Webster Field and is one of only 2 roads leading directly to Naval Air Station Patuxent River. And the base's commander's testimony before this committee in 2022 was that the reconstruction project would drastically improve flow in and out of the bases. This project has been supported by Navy leadership and sought by Navy leadership for years and complements ongoing efforts to improve the major interest in and out of NAS packs. Beyond the effects on the Navy installations, reconstruction would also dramatically increase the quality of life for surrounding communities, Great Mills and Lexington Park. Both of these are priority funding areas in St. Mary's County. Both are the most densely populated areas in St. Mary's County. Both are also the areas targeted for prioritizing future growth and development. Some of the approved plans for future growth and development were predicated on the timely construction of the improvements at Maryland Route 5 and Great Mills. Growth conditions were originally projected by the state to increase traffic by 27% by 2040. That was a projection that came out of 2020 when I think this project may have been first added to the CTP. We have already hit that benchmark today. Significant congestion during daily rush hours and high traffic events also poses safety risks. The crash rate in that area is higher than the state average. It also poses difficulty for evacuation efforts of Naval Air of Patuxent River. They drill evacuation efforts once a year. I think the target completion is between 30 minutes and an hour. It took 8.5 hours this past year. Overall, the project will mitigate congestion, address safety concerns, and improve connectivity to the nearby military bases and provide access to job centers. It'll also reap environmental benefits from, as mentioned, improving the stormwater management, improving the watershed to the nearby St. Mary's River, and helping the bridge mentioned that was first built 111 years ago at this now, increasing its protections from being at risk of flooding. In our hazardous weather event last year, the threshold for the flood elevation for a moderate flood event is 8 feet. We came at 7.7 and narrowly missed another flooding event on that stretch of road last week. Thank you, Mr. Gotch. That's why we pulled him off the snow truck and brought him up here today. That prepares the planned remarks mentioned. Here to field any questions from the committee, and thank you for the time this afternoon.
Thank you for your remarks. I don't see anybody on the committee from St. Mary's County, but I think this Route 5 project is something familiar to us. We've heard a lot from the vice chair of ECM, Brian Crosby, on this. Where was it in the CTP when it got cut out?
We are nearing the completion of design and acquisition of the right-of-ways. Construction was set to begin at the end of 2025, early 2026. So we were right on the cusp of it.
Wow. And that was not restored with this 150 million, I presume.
I said we have been dealing with that for 3 hours, I think, living with it. We saw the press release and we saw the punch list. I do not see the restoration.
I got a preview of it. I don't think it was in there. And I mean, it's important, your emphasis, something we're sort of continually hearing right now from each county as they come up. what a big deal these cuts are for the economic engines of their localities, right? We heard it in the Blue Line Corridor in Prince George's and Deerfield Road in Baltimore County and Montgomery with their bus rapid transit, and now you with Route 5. And we do want to, we want to prioritize the economy of the state. We've been talking about growing the economy, but certainly with these cuts, it's not going to get us where we need to be. So I appreciate you being here and emphasizing this. Everyone on this panel and our friends from Arundel as well. Thank you. Any other questions for this panel? Delegate Jones.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sneed, I want to thank you so much. Thanks. I want to thank you so much for your presentation. And as you know, as many know, I represent the capital city and parts of Arundel County, which is made up of a lot of peninsulas, which have one way in, one way out. Also, something that's extremely unique is we are barely above the water table, which causes for a lot of sinkholes and potholes that pop up out of nowhere. So I kind of want to drill down on something that I hear quite a bit, not only from constituents, whether it's in the office, via email, at Growls doing grocery shopping, but also from colleagues is really the I-97. And so the I-97 project, what would the delay or uncertainty, how would the I-97 project impact traffic, congestion, and other routes, as well as kind of talk about where we are on I-97 and the project, where you are in that process, please. Oh, there we go.
At this point in time, the TSMO study is complete and it shows the impact of I-97 congestion on the two parallel roadways, Ritchie Highway Route 2 and Route 3. What happens is whenever I-97 becomes congested, people just naturally drive to the other corridors, which not only congest the corridors themselves, but also congest the roadways in between those corridors, like Benfield Road and then to the north. So the issue becomes, if the congestion isn't solved by a widening project, which allows for congruent lanes throughout 97, rather than 2 lanes, 3 lanes, 2 lanes, which is incongruent. And the lane changing is what causes not only congestion, but traffic in the north and the south part of the county, because we are restricted by those waterways, those beautiful waterways that we have. And by solving the TSMO problem and widening 97, what you'll have is congruent roadways. You don't have people transitioning to Route 2 and Route 3 and congesting what is more a local state road, not meant for really high volume, high speed traffic, which is also a safety issue because you're putting high speed traffic on 40 or 50 mile an hour roads. It's really meant for an I-97, which is a 65 mile an hour road. It's a freight issue as well, because what happens if I-97 is congested, freight moves over to these corridors, and that becomes an issue for the whole state in terms of moving freight between the north and south up to the Baltimore City area, because I-97 connects to the I-695 Beltway, the Harbor Way Tunnel, and that traffic can just sit there for hours. I've experienced it in snowstorms when I'm returning from work at times, as have many others. So that is a really big impact on all of the roadways that connect to Route 2, Route 3, and I-97, and why they really did the TSMO study in the first place, because they identified it as one of the most congested corridors.
And if I could, Chairman, I'd also like to add that the unbelievable congestion when 50 hits 97 and the spillover, if you will, on all of our local roads also impacts our ability for the busiest hospital in Maryland, Anne Arundel Medical Center, 40th in the country in order to get ambulances and major emergency vehicles around. So thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Snead, thank you for being here. I appreciate the hospitality when we all spend a lot of time down in Annapolis during session. Just a question for you on Metro, as I think, you know, there's sort of a common perception, I think, among a lot of folks that it really only impacts Montgomery and Prince George's primarily, but actually Arundel has the third highest boardings of any county in the state behind Montgomery and Prince George's. It's 10,000 daily riders, give or take, from the last data that I have, which may not be 100% accurate since it's pre-COVID, but obviously it's significant. Can you tell me, if we don't fully fund Metro and we have to see sort of the doomsday scenario that the general manager has put out, what would that mean potentially to put 10,000 daily riders coming from your county, taking them off the train or off the commuter bus and sticking them back on the roads?
There would definitely be heightened congestion in our area, because when we don't have a transit option provided, and we have that many riders who are accessing the MARC station, like Odenton MARC, which is one of our only ways to access DC from this region. And we have a lot of DC employees who reside in Anne Arundel County, and they utilize Odenton as that only point of access. So by cutting off not only the Odenton MARC, but also cutting out commuter bus service, you've essentially cut the two largest links between Anne Arundel County and the Washington, DC metro area, not only for government jobs, but contracting jobs. And what really makes us a region and a mega region is our access to transit service. And it would have a really deleterious impact on our roadways, 50, 97, and the beltways as well, north and south.
Couldn't have put it any better. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I just want to clarify with the St. Mary's, the gentleman from St. Mary's. One of the things the committee is obviously concerned about is the additional cost of delay. And you mentioned up to 1.1 million per year for this one project that's only 26.5 million. So it's not that big of a project. But in addition to that, it's an economic development driver for your county. Am I correct?
It very much is. Just to clarify, how we arrived at that 1.1 million was that's 5% of the 21.9 million construction costs, and 5% is in fact what year over year our local Department of Public Works Transportation noticed inflation.
Understood, but we have to try to identify it somehow, and I think that's as good a measure as any. Do you have federal funds involved in this project?
I know that State Highway Administration has sought federal funding. I do not know if they were successful in obtaining federal funds yet for the
Okay,
project.
but you've already spent 4.6 million.
State has spent 4.6 million in design.
We have spent 4.6 million. So the issue really for the economic development portion of this is predictability. And actually, it's not just St. Mary's County, it's across the state, whether or not businesses can rely on Maryland to fund the projects, the road projects that employers need to get people to their employment centers. And so it's really an issue of predictability across the state for economic development that we're also concerned about. But your county highlights it perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Watson.
Great. Thank you very much, Delegate Watson, and thank you very much to the panel. Is there any other questions from members of the committee? Thank you very much, Mr. Snead, and also Mr. Hauser for being here today. The next panel that we'll call up is Baltimore City. We have today Corin Johnson, Director of Baltimore City Department of Transportation, also Bob Seaman, Director, Finance Director. And then also we have from the Maryland Municipal League, Bill George, Director of Policy and Research. Thank you very much for having them come up, and please proceed when you're ready. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Corinne Johnson. I'm the Director of the Baltimore City Department of Transportation. I would like to say Thank you to Chairman Barnes for having us here today. I know Mayor Scott got us started and we also have a whole team of us. So I'll let my other representatives introduce themselves as well because we work working together on this presentation.
Good afternoon. I'm Matt Garbark. I'm the Director of the Mayor's Office of Infrastructure Development.
Hi, good afternoon. Bob Senemy, Deputy Finance Director.
All right, so as already shared, Baltimore is very unique. In fact, because it's so unique, I've been up since 5:45 yesterday morning out there on the roads personally, all of the state roads within Baltimore City that we own and maintain, as well as local roads, making sure that they are safe and passable for all of your constituents and those that we serve. I take it very personally as Director of DOT to ensure that we are working to improve these roadways. And any type of cut to HUR has huge implications for Baltimore City. And although we are appreciative of the money that's been restored for this initial fiscal year 25, that proposed cut of that 63%, again, is more than all the other areas throughout the state combined. And so as you see here, we have over 2,000 miles of roadways, we have interstate highway, we have so many different, nearly 300 bridges and culverts. And so with decades of this investment in the city, our assets are critical and need attention. And we were at a point where we were celebrating and ready for this upcoming funding. This is just a visual of what has occurred in the past. And so after that HUR reduction in 2010, the city was forced to then incur over $200 million in debt. So what you see in that red is where we took out county transportation bonds to try to somehow close the gap a little bit, but it didn't make the impact. It didn't get us back to where we were. And so we kind of like touched the surface, but the increase that we'll talk about more was our hope of being able to use those local dollars successfully, being fiscally responsible to then leverage federal dollars and get even more investment for Baltimore City. So we'll get right into the impacts of the cuts. And the mayor kind of touched on this already. When we talk about the roadways, and we'll get into some pictures of these, it has real critical impacts. And our roadways, the condition of our roadways not only impact the motorists, the users that are using the roadways, but it also impacts the MTA buses that are on there as well. So if the roadways are in poor condition, that causes additional maintenance and operational costs for the state overall. And so with cuts, these are some critical roadways throughout Baltimore City that would be impacted, like Bel Air Road and Cold Spring, Northern Parkway, North Hilton, Broadway Street, and others. That is a significant cut, 190 lane miles that potentially would not be resurfaced. And so as you see here, we have key roadways that are in need of repair. 70% need to be repaved, and we have over a 7-year backlog of sidewalk repairs needed. So this isn't something about just trying to keep everything looking wonderful, but this is literally talking about roadways that in some cases are falling apart that we need to address. Any impacts to the budget directly impacts MTA and transit, and a 40% cut to MTA would have disproportionately impactful changes to the lives of Baltimore City residents. In fact, 27% of our city residents do not own a personal vehicle. They are reliant on transit to get them to and from work, school, services. The children, nearly 30,000 Baltimore students rely on MTA to get them to and from school. And it's not about just getting them to and from school. In many cases, they are arriving late. They may not be able to participate in extracurricular activities after school because of the delays and the time that it would take them. And then if they finish their extracurriculars in the evening and then have to travel when it's dark and may not be as safe, they make the decision to be safe and get home, as opposed to being that well-rounded student that we all as parents want for our children. And let me also point out that we have the Charm City Circulator. Our Charm City Circulator is a free service throughout Baltimore City. And in 2023, we had nearly 1.3 million passenger trips. And we're working on the transit development plan to then further enhance that program and implement a much needed route in the Cherry Hill community. So any impacts to the lots funding and all that would directly impact people who critically need free transportation to get to their jobs, to get to their schools. Additionally, we had the Harbor Connector, which had approximately 230,000 trips in 2023. This, for many of our residents, is a quality of life issue and safety issue. The cuts will have a direct impact on the safety of our roadways. We are embarking under my leadership, under the Scott administration leadership, we are embarking on changing our roadways, changing the climate and making everything safer for everyone who's on our roadways. We are doing this in ways to be more aligned with national best practices. And these HUR dollars are critical for these modernization efforts with funding these much needed traffic calming efforts. Baltimore City currently observes the highest 5-year rolling average of injury crashes of any county equivalent for Maryland. We experience 45 to 50 crashes per day in Baltimore City, which is essentially 2 crashes every hour on average. And so what are we doing to try to address this? We are using those HUR dollars and we're going after federal dollars. We have successfully acquired actually the largest Safe Streets for All grant of $1.9 million. Previously, we received $1 million for an action plan. We, of course, are continuously working to get highway safety improvement plan grants and others so that we're able to make much needed improvements in the communities of our residents, of our families. And so this isn't about, again, just updating our roads and making some changes, but it really is about lives so that we don't have someone traveling and ending up in a crash like this and not going home to their families. And then we get into the bridges and the major projects. This puts our entire transportation CIP program at risk. And although we're going to be talking about some potential bridges that would be at risk of not being replaced in a timely manner, the reality is that we have a bridge currently that is shut down because we did an inspection and we had concerns and we didn't have the money at that time to make the necessary repairs. And so it's closed. And it's been closed an extended period of time. And we're working on it. But the way that the CIP process works for us, it's almost like when you're buying a car. You need to have that down payment to then leverage loan. And so you set aside a little bit of money each month until you have that total down payment. That's what we're doing. So even though we are appreciative of the restorations for fiscal year 25, but we are setting aside money in 26 and 27 and 28 and beyond to get to that down payment amount and leverage those larger dollars. And so the larger the project, the more we need to set aside each year, little by little. Another key structure that is critical to the state, this Baltimore region, is the Hanover Street Bridge. With this bridge, it is over 100 years old. From a construction standpoint, it could easily be 150 million or more. When we initiate the NEPA process, and we're going through that, once that's approved, we have 10 years to get to construction. So imagine when you all talked about delays, what happens when there's a delay? Well, if there's a delay in the funding of us setting aside the money for those deposits and then getting the construction going, then it risks that 10-year time frame. And if we don't meet that 10-year time frame, we potentially have to pay money back to the federal government. So we're trying to get that money in, but then if we delay it as a city, as a state, then we end up losing that money and then having to pay it back. And then, as the mayor referenced, we have the upcoming playoff game for the Ravens. And we will have thousands of fans entering and traveling to the city. And so this is just one of those structures that, again, could be impacted, the Russell Street Viaduct. This one is 73 years old. this is not about Baltimore City. These are people traveling into Baltimore City from throughout the state of Maryland and beyond. People who travel, I know personally, people who travel from out of state to come and see games at our stadium because they like the Baltimore feel. They like the excitement and they like coming to our stadium versus their home stadium. So not only are we talking about those travelers, but we're talking about the economic investment of those people coming from other areas to come to Baltimore, the economic engine for the state of Maryland. And then we have West Baltimore United. Many people know it as the highway to nowhere. But again, we got in that first round, the Reconnecting Communities Grant, a $2 million planning grant. Again, anytime we go after those large dollars from the federal government, we had to have local dollars. And if we don't have them, we miss out. We are extremely active in Baltimore City of taking the little bit we have and going after as much as we can get. DOT has a great partnership with the Mayor's Office of Infrastructure Development. He has a whole team of people researching and finding grants and trying to work with us. And we've submitted recent applications and have been successful in those. We had that partnership here. We had that partnership with our Baltimore City delegation. We need that partnership with the state because Baltimore City is so important to the state of Maryland. And so we get into the ask. The mayor made it very clear. Baltimore and our residents have always been deeply impacted by the decisions made in the State House. And we were all aligned. It was like the stars were in alignment. We were excited. We've been telling the public that we're in a great position with the federal dollars, IIJA, everything that's coming together during this time. And then with the approval of that increase in our HUR allocation, we can't make up for the depression, that deep hole that you saw in the graph earlier, but we were going to make a difference. We were going to make real life, quality of life differences for people who are traveling our roadways and truly saving lives. Because when we do those resurfacing projects, it's not just about the pavement. We're also doing our ADA ramps. We're also doing traffic calming changes and improvements to the roadway and the pavement markings as well. So we're taking a collective approach to try to get a project done, get it done and move on and do it elsewhere to be as impactful as possible. And so I hope that you hear our plea, you understand the impacts, and that really consider that Baltimore is more than just, the local people who live there. But this really is critical for all of the state of Maryland, for all of the state infrastructure that is there. We have the stadium, we have the Maryland port. I have personally spoke with various companies that are in that port area that say that with a high school diploma, they have jobs for someone that they can end up making over 6 figures a year. But again, the challenge is them having transportation to get to those jobs. Someone could have health insurance, everything they need to support their family, but it's transportation. And so I want to make a difference, a lasting legacy in Baltimore City that is going to get people those jobs, is going to create money, revenue for the state. And as a whole, it'll be a win for everyone. To my team, anything else to add?
Thank you very much, Director. I would just add a couple points, real quick points about the Hanover Street Bridge. We're not talking about that as a general project. We're talking about that as a mega project. As the director said, we're looking at in excess of $100 million. It's likely going to be in excess of 300 million, or potentially even higher than that, because it is a drawbridge. When we look at money of that magnitude, we cannot fund it traditionally how we do with city, just city coffers putting money aside. What we're actually looking for with that, as well as Russell Street Viaduct, other things, is different forms of financing. And to get that financing, federal financing, which is very low interest, we would need to show a dedicated stream of revenue so that we can actually pay that back. One of the ways we were considering doing that was for this additional highway user revenue. So that is a big issue, not just now, not just next year, but upwards of 10, 15 years down the road, where we were using that to capitalize some large scale financing to actually get that project done. This would be similar to other massive projects that we're looking at, like West Baltimore United, that the director mentioned. The other thing is we are looking at additional freight capacity through the Howard Street Tunnel, as well as additional ridership through the Frederick Douglass Tunnel. These collectively would be about $4 billion worth of federal investment. What we're looking at is getting the freight to and from the Port of Baltimore as well as through Baltimore City. We need to make sure that the trucks that are delivering those to and from the port can adequately access the roads and can adequately get through the city and get to and from where they need to go. We also want to look at and need to make sure that people coming to and from the transit stops for the MARC train as well as Amtrak with the large Penn Station redevelopment can also adequately navigate that and connect to those facilities as well. So as the director mentioned, Baltimore City is much more than just its residents. And as the mayor mentioned, as goes Baltimore, so goes the state. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks for being with us. Have we heard from Bill, from Emma? I can take questions. Right. We thought since we had our city here, we could take Emma at the same time.
Sure thing. Thank you, Chair Barnes and members of the committee. My name is Bill George. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Research for the Maryland Municipal League. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. Municipalities are home to 25% of the state's population, but cover less than 5% of the land area. Municipalities are responsible for roughly 9% of maintenance over the lane miles in the state. Over half of Visit Maryland's top 20 places to visit are in municipalities or border municipalities, and yet municipalities receive less than 3% of HURs. The reason I'm talking to you about this is that it's to point to the fact of the oversized impact on local roads within municipalities as hubs for places for people to live, work, and play. So HURs occupy only one page in the CTP, but it's incredibly important for municipalities within the state's planning document. Why is it so important? It's because it is the largest, in many cases, the largest state shared revenue that goes to municipalities. For some of our members, that's upwards of $3 million a year. For some of our smaller members, it's in the tens of thousands of dollars, but in either case, it represents a substantial portion of that municipality's allocation for transportation budget for that year. So when HURs were cut in 2009, it left a huge hole in municipal budgets, as you've heard before. The impact on municipalities with these budget cuts or HUR cuts, you've heard this before, it's deferral of maintenance, it's incomplete projects, it is patching as opposed to paving. And in many cases, municipalities are dipping into their general fund in order to cover necessary transportation infrastructure projects, ones that can't be put off any further. And there's a reason why MML made increasing the local share of HUR a priority for over a decade. And thanks to the overwhelming support of the General Assembly in 2018 and 2022, the local share increased. But due to rising costs of construction and the building up of deferred projects, even with those increases, we're seeing municipalities are still using general fund dollars to cover transportation projects. Every year, municipalities and counties have to fill out an HUR reporting form to send into SHA. This is to track how HUR funds are being spent. Are they being spent on eligible projects? That sort of thing. Little known fact is that there's an appendix part of that document where the local government can include projects that are either not being pursued because of lack of funding, or they're using general fund dollars to pay for those HUR eligible projects. And in scanning through some of these HUR reports, I mean, we're talking just in the municipal world alone, we're talking millions of dollars worth of and dozens of projects that are going either unfunded or are being used general fund dollars to complete those tasks. Now, when general fund dollars are being used in municipal world, it was alluded to earlier, that the ratio of HUR dollars to transportation dollars for municipalities is really high. So when general fund dollars are being used, those funds are generally just not being used for other essential services, right? This means if money's being spent from the general fund on transportation projects, that means that's money that's not going towards trash pickup. That means that's not money that's going towards public safety. That's money that's not going towards park and rec. So it's just, I wanted to point out the outsized impact that HUR has on not just transportation projects in municipalities, but when HURs are being underfunded, it's really impacting municipal budgets in total. So while we appreciate the announcement from the administration this morning, as we've talked about before, for fully funding HURs for fiscal year 25, it is a short-term fix. It was talked about earlier about how that, isn't the best way to necessarily run a railroad. So we've seen something comparable to this in years past. So I want to say it was from about fiscal year 13 through 18. The governor put in the budget supplemental transportation grants for municipalities. The General Assembly every year kept that in the budget and in some cases increased that dollar amount, which is obviously well appreciated and was meant to augment the low level of HURs that municipalities were receiving at the time. And while very much appreciated and went a long way towards routine maintenance and that sort of thing, it was impossible for our members to do any sort of long-term planning, not knowing whether that 1 year grant was going to show up in the budget and whether the General Assembly was going to keep it that year. So I can say that this has been dealt with before in municipal world, and again, appreciated for the full funding, but it is very, very difficult to do any sort of long-term planning for transportation projects. So now our focus turns to working with you all in the General Assembly to keep that money in the fiscal year 25 budget and to find a long-term viable solution for transportation funding generally going into the future. That's where we see ourselves as local partners and are happy to work with you in any capacity. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us very much. Questions for this panel, Delegate Ruff?
I was going to concede to Delegate Smith first.
You're right, Delegate Smith.
Thank you, my sweet mate, for your kindness. And thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for everyone that's presented today, including MML, which I don't really have too many opportunities to engage with you, but I'm glad you're here. Great to see you. I also wanted to lift up that your colleague, Kristen Ahern, the CIP planner for the city, is also joining us by Zoom. And so my question for anyone who feels best poised to answer it is, if we need to see some type of sustainable funding source to meet various federal matches, is there really a constructive difference between one-time money or a cut?
No, ma'am.
That's a complete sentence. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Chairman. Director Johnson, thank you for being here and for all your hard work. I know yesterday was definitely a difficult day for you, and we appreciate you all for your efforts and making sure that our residents stay safe in Baltimore City. I wanted to talk a little bit about the proposed cuts to MTA. You gave us the stat that 27% of our city residents don't have personal vehicles. Do you guys in your department have a sense of, and the mayor kind of talked about the fact that, obviously certain areas of the city, that number is a lot higher. Do you have a sense of what areas of the city, what neighborhoods of the city have the highest ridership? And then can you give us kind of palpable understanding of on the other end of those cuts, what actually will decline in the MTA service with that 40% reduction to the budget?
Yeah, so I'll start with the reduction piece. So with the cuts, then that means that there's going to be potentially less buses on there. So people will have to wait longer amounts of time. If there again, cuts to the operations and maintenance of the buses, then we're already experiencing a lot of breakdowns already. People are missing the bus because they're sitting there waiting while the bus is broken down. And so people will experience more of those instances where they're not able to get where they need to be. Additionally, with the Charm City Circulator, it means where we have maybe buses coming every 15 minutes, 2 or so buses on a route, we have to cut it down to 1 bus. And so people are having to wait 30 minutes potentially to get their ride. So it does have direct impacts to those riders. And like I said, we are establishing the Cherry route. And so that is very strategic to try to establish some kind of a loop capacity to that community. So if we are trying to position up that one, but then we have the cuts, we're going to have to cut another route to be able to position that up. And as far as the other areas, yes, some of the areas can be as high as 57, 59%, where people do not have cars. And so they are extremely reliant on transit.
And just to be clear, we're talking about areas like Sandtown, we're talking about areas like Emerson Village, in my district, talking about areas like Park Heights. Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, those communities. And again, we've been working closely with MDOT to establish dedicated bus lanes and try to help those areas where we are seeing those higher ridership numbers. And so it'll have major impacts on those communities.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Ivy, who probably represents the most.
And I appreciate you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me and for pointing out that fact. Yes, we have 8 municipalities in the 47th district, 27 in Prince George's County more broadly. And I just wanted Director George, if you don't mind, to speak to some of the budgetary restraints that these municipalities are facing more broadly. This is a transportation hearing, but a general fund and municipal talk is, it's really just one pot. So if you could speak to us about some of the shortage surrounding our police departments of public works, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. What I'll speak to is maybe more on the general fund revenue side for municipalities, and that is the sources that go into municipal general funds are extremely limited in what they are. It is in most municipalities, over half of their general fund budget comes from property tax. There is a little bit that comes in via the income tax. And then by and large, the rest of it is HURs, police aid from the state. I'm speaking, general fund does not include necessarily enterprise funds like water and sewer, where those are charged their own rates and go into a separate pot that are then used for maintenance of the system. So that's not necessarily considered general fund. So there's a lot of constraints on how municipalities can raise revenue. It's really just the property tax lever is really the only one that they have control over. Some are able to have a little bit of supplementary income from admissions and amusement tax. But that varies heavily depending on the types of businesses that are located in that municipality. And when it comes to spending, it's essential services, as I mentioned earlier, and it really all comes from these handful of general fund revenue streams.
And just to be a little more precise on that, would you say that any of the municipalities in Prince George's, or the majority of them, are they flush for cash, or is this going to be a very detrimental thing that they'd have to endure if these cuts were to be sustained in the out years?
Yeah, absolutely. Similar to what it sounds like the state is seeing, we're seeing some of that federal money dry up from some of the COVID relief packages. And as that starts to kind of make its way out of the fiscal year plannings for municipal governments, we're starting to see less room on the margins. And so cuts to a primary revenue source like HURs would be very impactful.
Yes, as a former town councilman myself, I hope that we can fully restore the HUR fund. Thank you so much for your work, and to the entire panel. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you all for being with us very much. That means a lot. I think we have. Delegate Smith has another
Yeah, one really quick question. Sorry for people that
mind just saying.
probably good friends from Baltimore. I apologize. So super quick. So one of the pictures in your presentation was literally right beside my house because my kids go to Henderson Hopkins. So that was Ashland right by my house. That obviously needs some healing. But I was wondering, because this is something I think as state officials, but also our council and municipal leaders often face, are questions around street calming and traffic calming. And I wanted to know, is there a relationship between kind of the backlog and your ability to achieve those types of safety improvements?
So definitely. Also included in the CIP, we have traffic safety spot improvements. We have neighborhood traffic calming. So we've been working on trying to knock out some of our backlogs. And so what we're doing is, instead of looking at individual locations here, we're looking at a kind of a geographical area for a neighborhood and saying, what are we seeing? What's the pattern? What are the issues? And if it is speeding, then we're trying to find ways of addressing the speeding. Now, if it happens to be that we're going through and say resurfacing Ashland, then as a part of that, we're going to determine, is it lane narrowing? Is it speed humps? Is it what do we need to do some bump outs in the intersections to help slow down people when they're turning through an intersection? So we're trying to find those ways of addressing some of those concerns while we're doing the resurfacing and make that complete project. And so that's a part of our overall strategy moving forward. You're welcome.
Very good. Once again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have the town of Frederick, or the county of Frederick County. And then we'll conclude with Howard County, who will be online at the end. Over.
There was, right there. Thank you. So I get scroller. Perfect. Thank you.
Whenever you're ready and the presentation's ready, you can start.
Awesome, wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and the Appropriations Committee for having us here today. For the record, my name is Victoria Venable. I am the Government Relations Director for the Frederick County Executive, Jessica Fitzwater, and I have two wonderful rock star members of our team from the Transit Services Division. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to jump right into it. So you've heard all of the thank yous and the appreciation for the announcement this morning. I want to urge the same sentiments you've already heard, that is quite frankly a Band-Aid we appreciate, but one that we need to be moving towards more long-term solutions. And so today we are going to talk about 4 of the areas that we see impacting Frederick County the most. 3 of those have been addressed temporarily with that Band-Aid. But one is very significant, and it is the Safety and Operational Improvement Project for US 15. And I'll jump right into that. So as I said, the US 15 safety project has been a major priority for the county and the city of Frederick. This has been a priority as far back as I can remember, and looking back at our transportation letters, this specific project has been in it for since 2014. Various other projects in that same corridor have been our priority, one of our major priorities since 2007. So this is an area that has some significant traffic and operational challenges, as well as safety challenges. The project on the table here has reached 30% design and has the full funding for design, right-of-ways, and utilities. But the project is to help address some of the traffic and safety conditions that are created due to weaves and merges in an area between Route 70, so I-70, and Maryland 26. This is a very high traffic area, and it is also one of the areas that faces the most crashes and collisions in the state of Maryland. So I want to reiterate that this is a huge priority for our administration because of these conditions that I've already discussed. And in fact, this is a bipartisan tradition or priority for us. We see this as one of the key ways that we can improve the quality of life and safety for our residents. When we heard about some of the proposed cuts, I asked our Division of Fire and Rescue to look up some data. And they told me from December 1 of 2022 to November 30th of 23, so that's pretty much exactly a year, there were 81 crashes or 81 patients brought to our hospital with injuries received due to crashes just in that less than 4-mile segment on this highway. And so we're talking about an area that does see a lot of crash and collision activity. It is also the subject of a lot of heartburn and frustration. And when you're sitting in traffic, of course, so there's the quality of life concerns there as well. I also want to highlight that this is a project that was pointed to in response to a very high profile and tragic accident that occurred in the spring of 2023. We had a tanker explosion on this highway. Several families lost their homes, and there was a fatality associated with the accident. And so This has been something that our administration, our community, delegates and senators in the General Assembly, and our partners at the state level have highlighted as a way that we are addressing concerns that our community has with this section of highway. The project includes noise and safety barriers to help provide a little bit more of a barrier for those communities. It also addresses the traffic by inside widening, so several lanes inside the roadway to help alleviate some of the safety concerns that occur with the merges and the weaving. And then I will iterate what we've heard today about the trends of economic development being impacted by these cuts. Route 15 is also a core artery into Frederick County and Frederick City. It is the main way you get to our largest employer, which is Fort Detrick. So we've also been in conversations with our federal delegation about the concerns they have about the resilience of Fort Detrick and our community due to the cuts of this project. And then finally, I will just highlight some of the concerns we have around the state highway user revenue cuts. Once again, very grateful for a temporary solution for that, but I did want to highlight what some of our municipalities are facing with these cuts as well, as they're partners with us in all of this work as well. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues to my left.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Roman Steichen. I am the Director of Transit Services of Frederick County. We are appreciative of the temporary solutions announced this morning that will allow locally operated transit systems, such as ourselves in Frederick, to remain whole for FY25. However, this foretells a consistent pattern of reducing state funding to local systems, which places a heavier burden on local jurisdictions. Funding directly impacts our ability to provide critical transit service and disproportionately impacts those who rely on transit, those such as older adults, people with disabilities, our low-income residents, and small businesses. Stability in funding allows us to ensure that all Frederick County residents, visitors, and employees have access to life opportunities and enables us to be proactive in spending state funds rather than reactive, taking us away from delivering service and requiring our attention to be paid to constantly changing budgets and responding to as such. Budgets are prepared and submitted years in advance, but cuts happen with the stroke of a pen.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamie McKay, and I am the Deputy Director and Chief Safety and Security Officer at Transit Services of Frederick County. Thank you for having us here today. I do want to note that our ridership has substantially rebounded, and we are one of the few agencies nationwide which are experiencing above 100% of pre-pandemic ridership. The levels that we're seeing demonstrate how significant transit is to our community, from everywhere between our rural communities all the way to our cities. The proposed cuts would have impacted the nearly 700,000 riders that we served last year alone. The governor's temporary restoration of funds for FY25 was welcome news for our team. Our team did not have time to react, respond, and adapt a long-standing budget with limited notice and a small team. I'd like to note that larger agencies have departments, while us smaller agencies, such as locally operated transit systems, often just have people. This money allows us to spend some time to plan effectively, but we do want to reinforce that this planning must be done with local partners at the table. We urge you to join us to determine appropriate, sustainable solutions to move us forward together. Thank you.
Any questions for our friends from Frederick County? I don't have anyone on the committee, but we had a great leader from Frederick County for many years, Carol Krim, and certainly these projects and Route 15, we're no stranger to those projects. She's kept that at top of our mind throughout her leadership with the committee. So we appreciate you being here. Delegate Harris.
Appreciate it, Chair. Just one quick question. So you mentioned a really key point that we were sitting here discussing just now about your ridership going up over 100%, pre-pandemic numbers. So what did you all do, change, increase, take away? Like, what is it that you all noticed that allow you all to have that, see that increase?
Truthfully, I don't imagine that it's anything we've been proactive about other than providing good quality, accessible, reliable, and efficient service in the community. But I think it underlies the need that is present in Frederick County. Certainly during the pandemic, our ridership numbers dipped less than a majority of the jurisdictions across the state, demonstrating that people in Frederick really demanded better transit service and were using the service that was available. I will note that we are providing service for the first time on weekends to rural communities. We are really trying to step up what we're doing and how we do it, but it's challenging to prepare long-term planning documents and efforts when the funding is unstable.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I'll just add to that one factor that's probably sticking in my brain of how this happened is we are a very fast growing jurisdiction. We are the fastest growing jurisdiction in Maryland. And that the demographic changes are the demographics that want to ride buses. I mean, we have people moving into our municipalities, which is the smart growth policies that we love to see. But that also means that when we have our town halls about our budget, transportation and transit is by and large are one of the things we hear the most, even in the municipalities that are not close geographically to Frederick City. Our Brunswicks, our Walkersvilles, they're asking us to provide those services.
Thank you. Delegate Stanko, one of the neighbors for Frederick County.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to that point, I always think about Western Maryland in a kind of holistic way. Some of the highlighted projects that we had today, obviously US 15, thinking about Washington County and I-81 in Carroll County, US 32. And I was at there's a question here. I was at a event for commercial businesses focused on Western Maryland. I think it might have been the day the State Highway Administration announced their changes. One of the big conversations was about that change and how it's going to impact the commercial development for both businesses, and then the kind of trickle down effects of that. Could you just talk about how more specifically how the change here impacts the commercial side of development for Western Maryland?
Absolutely. And when I was thinking about who to bring on this panel, our economic development division director was one of the folks that we wanted to bring. We were trying to coordinate calendars, but one of the reasons that Frederick County and some of our colleagues to the west of us are attractive for economic development opportunities and commercial investment is because we have arteries like US 15 going right through our right to our community. So we're a lot closer to Washington, DC and Baltimore than some people may think, because we are on those key roadways. And so, that is something that we hear is a factor in site selection. It is also a factor in things, as I said earlier, Fort Detrick highlighting resiliency and security for our communities and our nation as a whole. This is a concern that they have as well, being able to get in and out of Frederick, in and out of Fort Detrick quickly. I'll remind you, Camp David is not far from us either. All of these things are connected by those roadways. And so it is definitely a factor when folks are thinking about what sites to select in their commercial development, or whether or not it's the right place to start your business. Like, these are factors.
Excellent. Thank you all again for being with us. We appreciate you very much.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
All right, we're going to conclude with Howard County, and they are joining us online. All right, is Howard, you all with us? Hey, welcome, David.
Yeah. Good afternoon.
We know, given the snow emergency we've had and the day, I know it's been a day for you, but we do appreciate you taking time out and being with us. So thank you very much.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Thank you. Obviously, we shared the slides earlier, and every member of the committee should have a copy of our slide set, but we're not going to be able to share this during the presentation. In my talk, I will sort of reference the slide number as we're moving along. So good afternoon. My name is David Cookson. And I serve as the Deputy Director at the Deputy Administrator of the Howard County Office of Transportation. I'd like to express my thanks to the committee members for allowing us the opportunity to discuss the implications of MDOT's CTP plan on our community members, our visitors, local businesses, and our regional partners. As you know, this morning, MDOT announced a plan to restore $150 million in FY25 transportation funding through a general fund transfer. While this morning's news is very welcome to hear, the funding uncertainty beyond FY25 still presents long-term funding challenges for transportation that will have a significant impact on Howard County. Today, I want to focus our comments on the following elements: maintenance of the maintenance and system preservation, our local transit service, our regional bus connections, project delivery, and lastly, the safety of pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers on our roadway network. If we skip to slide 2, the system and maintenance and system preservation slide. Prior to the most recent funding announcement today, the CTP proposed to freeze the highway user revenue allocations to local governments at the FY24 level and walk back the previously proposed increases for FY25. For Howard County, that would have resulted in $700,000 less than the projected amount to support our annual highway resurfacing budget of more than $16 million. While our Department of Public Works does an admirable job in maintaining our roads through repaving, curb and ramp repairs, and vegetation clearing, much like many other counties, we face an ongoing, increasingly challenging task of maintaining aging infrastructure while dealing with the impacts of climate change. Having a very reliable funding source is critical to ensuring the county properly planned projects. While this funding gap has been addressed in the governor's plan, the funding uncertainty for FY26 and beyond remains a significant challenge. A reduction in the HUR revenues would require Howard County to reallocate resources by diverting funds from other important county programs or deferring maintenance on roadways as well. While postponing a paving project might not initially seem like a significant issue, it's important to note that even a brief delay of a couple of years can transform a simple repaving project into a more extensive and costly project. You can go to the next slide, reference next slide. For local transit service, MDOT has initially proposed to reduce lots and assistance by 40% across the state. This funding will be fully restored in FY25 with an allocation of $26 million to the lot systems across the state. We appreciate this important step to maintain support for local transit. However, similarly to how we use our revenue funding, there's a need for long-term and reoccurring funding sources for the lots in FY26 and beyond. Howard County is able to fund the majority of transit service through the RTA of Central Maryland, which serves residents of both Howard County, Baltimore County, and Arundel and Prince George's County as well. We are very concerned that the funding uncertainty can negatively impact important RTA service improvements in our counties. As an urbanized county not served by MTA or WMATA, we have long needed improved connections to major employment centers, such as BWI, Fort Meade, and the NSA. These service expansions are envisioned in our 5-year transit development plan for the RTA, but they require increased investment to grow our service to serve our customers. In addition, Howard County makes significant investments in our bus fleet to ensure they deliver reliable everyday transit services starting at 5:30 a.m. to 11 p.m. every day. The reliability of our service is crucial to us. We maintain a strong partnership with MDOT MTA, which enables us to leverage local and state funds to ensure that our buses are consistently maintained and placed on schedule. This has resulted in an important reduction in missed trips as our fleet has been modernized. However, any interruptions or reductions in availability of replacement buses will directly impact our customers. Our customers rely heavily on a dependable transit service to access jobs and education. And for many, they have limited affordable transportation alternatives, with 70% of our riders earning less than $40,000 a year. The importance of this service can be seen in RTA ridership numbers, which have returned to levels we last experienced in the fall of 2019. If you can jump now to slide 4 on regional commuter bus connections. The CTP previously would have eliminated all commuter bus routes in the state starting July 1st. 8 of these routes serve Howard County, with 6 routes leading to the DC area and 2 routes to downtown Baltimore. Today, MDOT stated they're committed to maintain service on the highest ridership routes through a partial restoration of funding. It's not clear to us how MDOT defines highest ridership routes, but we look forward to more details on the final commuter bus funding decisions in the very near future. And while commuter bus services in Maryland and across the U.S. have been severely impacted by COVID, congestion and traffic along major corridors has returned. Commuter bus is one of the more viable options to reduce congestion and emissions along these long corridors. If Howard County commuter bus services are eliminated, at least 1,240 one-way trips would be diverted back to vehicles on highways or require the use of RTA connection to the Mark-Camden line. Lastly, if we move to the last slide, slide 5. So in conclusion, Howard County's focus remains on ensuring safety across our state and local road system. The map displayed on that last slide illustrates the number of crashes along the US 1 corridor in Howard County, with over 900 crashes and 21 fatalities occurring between 2018 and 2023. This is an ongoing trend that is very concerning to us. The data confirms that the findings from an earlier in-depth crash study, which served as the foundations for multiple projects along the corridor. We took the initiative to locally fund the design of 4 US 1 safety projects, with MDOT supporting the construction of these improvements. 2 of these projects have already been completed and 2 are more on the way. This collaboration with MDOT has been very positive, and we are appreciative of it. However, the fiscal realities presented by the current budget forecast will impact our ongoing efforts. While Howard County is thankful to have received a federal Safe Streets and Roads for All grant for the US 1 corridor, the award of $488,000 represents less than 10% of our original request to address all these safety issues along the US 1 corridor. This indicates that we're having over-reliance on discretionary federal funding, which may cause delays in much-needed safety improvements that will bring us closer to meeting our Vision Zero goals for the county. Additionally, while the revised CTP will restore much-needed funding for county efforts, other important county priorities have not been addressed, including the TSMO project on I-70 and 29, which has been pushed back. It's not clear when this needed project will be delivered to our residents and visitors. In closing, as you consider our transportation funding priorities for this session, we look forward to a continued dialogue and partnership with the Maryland General Assembly and the Maryland Department of Transportation to address our core transportation priorities and throughout Maryland. Thanks for your attention, leadership, and collaboration.
Thank you, and thank you so much for being here. Any questions, Delegate Watson?
We just want to thank you for being last at the hearing and waiting all of the time that you did. And thank you for repeating the themes that we've heard throughout, which is the need for long-term planning, the economic impact on employment centers, the increased costs, predictability. We appreciate your time here, and we are going to work hard to see what we can do.
Thank you again for being with us. Have a great day. Committee, I want to thank you all for hanging in there for 3 hours now. We're not quite in full session shape yet, but we did pretty good today. And I just want to reiterate what the chair of the subcommittee just said and what we've heard all day today is that first, the $150 million is needed and the restoration is a good thing. And every dollar restored is going to make a difference in people's lives. And we shouldn't lose sight of that. But secondly, that it does not solve our long-term problems and that we're going to be back here next year unless we get serious about solving it. That these projects are so critical for our state for economic impact and growth for people's lives and getting people home to their families and off to work. And I want to reiterate something the mayor said, the mayor of Baltimore. He said, I have confidence that we have the leadership in this state to get this done. And I agree with that. Our speaker, you already knew that, our speaker, but also our Senate president and our governor. I believe that we can get this done together and that we should solve this problem in this session this year and not leave the uncertainty sitting out there and resolve what are really important transportation trust fund shortfalls and needs. So with that, the budget is out tomorrow. We're going to get to work. Thank you all. We're adjourned.